The air in the Ministry's restricted archives tasted of dust and forgotten spells, cold in a way that settled deep beneath the skin. Hermione Granger pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, her breath a faint wisp in the lamplight. The report from the Rosier estate had been troubling. Walls veined with frost that resisted every warming charm, a hearth that refused to burn, and 3 generations of witches and wizards suddenly unable to so much as light a candle. The Ministry had dismissed it as seasonal damp until little Alara Rosier's tears froze before they hit the floor. Now, standing in the silent vaults beneath the Department of Mysteries, Hermione ran her fingers along the spines of ancient tomes bound in dragon-hide and ice-etched silver. The archive hummed with residual magic, a low, thrumming vibration beneath her boots. She had requested access to pre-Wizengamot lineage records. Anything tied to blood oaths, ancestral curses, or elemental bindings. Those clerks had scoffed. Bloodline decay? Impossible. But the frost was real, and it was spreading. She found the first clue in a crumbling ledger from the 13th century, its pages brittle as autumn leaves. The ink had faded, but certain words shimmered faintly under her diagnostic charm. Words like frostmantle, oathbound, and Malfoy. Her pulse quickened. The Malfoys had been influential even then. Their name whispered in treaties, and forbidden pacts. She traced a passage describing a ritual performed during the schism of the northern clans, where a Malfoy patriarch swore an oath on frozen ground to preserve his line's supremacy, by ice, through ice, against all who would defile. The sentence ended abruptly, as if the scribe had been interrupted, or afraid. A gust of wind stirred the papers on her desk, though no window had opened. The temperature dropped sharply. Frost spider-webbed across the stone floor, creaking toward her boots. Hermione stepped back, wand raised. Lumos Maxima. The light flared, but the frost didn't retreat. Instead, the air thickened, and for a heartbeat she saw a figure, pale, robed, face obscured by a veil of ice, standing at the end of the aisle. Then it was gone. She exhaled, her breath crystallizing in front of her. This isn't just a curse. It's a memory, a living one. Her notes scattered as another cold wave rolled through the room. She gathered them quickly, heart-pounding. Whatever was happening, it was tied to the Malfoys. And if the Rosiers were the first to fall, they wouldn't be the last. The old families, those clinging to blood purity and ancient names, were the most vulnerable. The frost wasn't random. It was selective. It was punishing. She needed answers, and there was only one person who might have them, whether he knew it or not. When she stepped out of the Ministry, lifts into the atrium, the golden wizard's wand still shot light across the ceiling, but the warmth felt false, thin. Snow had begun to fall outside, though it wasn't due for weeks. Large, slow flakes drifted against the enchanted glass, too quiet, too deliberate. She was halfway to the Flu network when a familiar voice, cool and edged with impatience, stopped her. "Granger, you look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, a poorly written statute." Draco Malfoy stood near the fountain, his gray cloak dusted with snow that hadn't been there moments ago. His hair was paler than she remembered, almost silver in the dim light, and there were shadows beneath his eyes. "I've seen something worse," she said. "I've seen the beginning of something that could freeze us all." He raised an eyebrow, dramatic as ever. "This isn't a joke, Malfoy. The Rosiers are losing their magic. Frost in their walls, ice in their blood. And it's linked to your family, to an oath. One that's waking up." His expression didn't change, but she saw it. The faint tightening around his eyes, the way his hand brushed the cuff of his sleeve, where an old scar from the dark mark used to be. "And you came to me?" he asked quietly. "Who else?" she said. "If this is your family's curse, then maybe, just maybe, the cure is in your blood too." Snow fell in slow, silent sheets over the ruins of the old Malfoy outbuilding, a forgotten stone structure tucked behind the overgrown hedges of the northern estate. The air was thick with a cold that didn't belong to the season, sharp, metallic, as though the very breath of winter had been poisoned. Hermione Granger pulled her cloak tighter, her boots crunching over frost-laced gravel. The Ministry's tracing spells had led her here, to this forgotten corner of wizarding aristocracy, where the ground shimmered faintly beneath a thin veneer of ice. Beside her, Draco Malfoy stood motionless, his pale face unreadable. He hadn't spoken since they apparated in, his eyes fixed on the crumbling archway ahead. "It's never been this cold here," he said at last, his voice low, "not even in the worst winters." Hermione glanced at him. "It's not natural cold, it's magical, and it's spreading." She stepped forward, wand raised. "Lumos glacis." The light that spilled from her wand tip was tinged blue, revealing swirls of silver frost crawling up the walls like ivy. Beneath the ice, something glinted. She knelt, brushing away a layer of rime with gloved fingers. The stone beneath was carved with intricate patterns. Serpents coiled around a tree, roots twisting into runes. And at the center, unmistakable, the Malfoy crest. But it wasn't merely carved. It was frozen into the stone, as if the crest had been imprinted from within, radiating outward in crystalline fractures. The ice pulsed faintly, almost imperceptibly, like a slow heartbeat. "That's impossible," Draco murmured, crouching beside her. "The crest was never part of this building. This was a hunting lodge, no ancestral markers." "Unless it wasn't meant to be seen," Hermione said, tracing the edge of the frozen sigil with her wand. "Unless it was sealed." A sharp crack echoed through the ruin. Both of them stiffened. The ice was spreading. Faster now, creeping up the adjacent walls, forming delicate lace-like patterns that spelled out words in an archaic script. Hermione leaned closer. "It's a vow," she whispered. "In old high arcanum. By blood and bone, by ice and oath, the line shall bear the weight of silence." Draco's breath caught. That's from the Oath of Grieving. My great-grandfather mentioned it once. A binding, a promise made during the War of the Hollow Veil. No one believed it was real. "And now it's waking up," Hermione said softly. She looked at him. "Your family made this oath, Draco, and it's tied to blood. That's why the weakening started with pure bloods. Especially the old lines. The curse is remembering its makers." He stared at the frozen crest, his jaw tight. "We didn't ask for this. We didn't even know." "No," she said. "But someone did. And someone broke the terms." She pointed to a fracture in the ice where the crest serpent was severed at the tail. "Look here, the vow is damaged. Not just dormant. Wounded. Like it's been violated." A gust of wind howled through the ruin, and the temperature dropped sharply. Frost spiderwebbed across Hermione's lenses. She blinked, rubbing at them, and when she looked again, the ice had formed a new shape, a handprint, small, child-sized, pressed against the stone as if someone had tried to push through from the other side. Draco stood abruptly. "We need to get out of here." "Wait." "No, Granger. This place isn't just haunted by magic. It's alive with it, and it knows who I am." She hesitated, then nodded, rising. But as she turned, the ground trembled. The frozen crest flared with a pale blue light, and a whisper slithered through the air, not in words, but in feeling, grief, deep and ancient, and beneath it, a single insistent plea. "Remember us." Hermione looked back one last time. The ice was receding slightly, revealing the crest once more. But now, beneath the serpent's coils, a name was etched in delicate script. Alcyone. She didn't know the name, but Draco did. His face went ashen. "Alcyone Malfoy, my grandmother's sister. She disappeared during the Potter's Rise. They said she fled to France, but she never made it." Hermione met his eyes. Maybe she didn't flee. Maybe she was silenced. And in that moment, the cold didn't feel like a curse anymore. It felt like a cry. Snow fell in silence over the skeletal trees of the forbidden forest, each flake catching the pale morning light like powdered quartz. Hermione pulled her cloak tighter, the weight of the ministry seal in her pocket, a dull pressure against her thigh. The summons had come at dawn, cold, formal, undeniable. Draco Malfoy was to be questioned, not requested, not invited, questioned, as if he were a suspect, not a source. The iron gates of Malfoy Manor loomed ahead, half-rusted and draped in frost. They groaned as she pushed them open, the sound like a breath caught in a frozen throat. The path to the manor was overgrown, the gravel swallowed by creeping ivy turned brittle with ice. She remembered this place from her nightmares, darkened corridors, a wand pressed to her cheek, Bellatrix's laughter ringing like cracked glass. But today the house stood quiet, almost mournful, its once proud turrets sagging under the weight of accumulated snow. A house elf answered the door, smaller than Dobby, with wide, wary eyes. "Miss Granger," it squeaked, voice trembling. "Master is expecting you." Hermione hesitated. "He knew I was coming. The ward spoke your name at the gate, miss. He has been awake since midnight." She followed the elf through the grand hall, her boots echoing on marble veined with frost. Chandeliers hung dim, their crystals clouded with age. Tapestries of the Malfoy lineage drooped from the walls, their threads brittle, faces half lost to time. And there, standing before the hearth with his back turned, was Draco. He wore black, as always, but there was something softer in the cut of his coat. Less armor, more mourning. His hair, once slicked back with arrogance, now fell loose at his temples, touched with silver at 28. When he turned, his gray eyes were sharp, but not unkind. "Granger," he said, "I suppose this is about the symbol." She nodded, pulling a folded parchment from her coat. Unfurling it carefully, she revealed a charcoal sketch of an intricate rune, a spiral of frozen thorns encircling a broken crown. It had been found etched into the floor of the Parkinson estate, the day Pansy's magic failed her mid-spell. "It's Malfoy script," she said. "19th century, I'd say, but the magic behind it, older, colder." Draco exhaled, long and slow. "Not 19th century. It's older than the house." He moved to a cabinet, built into the wall, its wood inlaid with silver serpents. From within, he withdrew a leather-bound book, its cover cracked with age. "My grandmother kept this, a family grimoire. Most of it's nonsense. Love potions, status curses. But this symbol, it's the oath of Winter's blood." Hermione stepped closer. "An oath? A vow made in ice, binding, irreversible. The Malfoys swore it generations ago, to protect something, or someone. No one remembers what. But the magic, it reacts to betrayal. It turns inward. Leakens the bloodline." She studied his face. "You think that's what's happening? The frost in the veins? The failed magic? It's not a curse. It's a consequence." Draco met her gaze. "I think we're paying for a sin we don't even remember committing." A silence settled between them, thick as the snow outside. The fire in the hearth flickered, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts across the walls. "And you?" she said softly. "You're not afraid?" He almost smiled. "Afraid? Every day. But fear doesn't stop the frost, Granger. And neither does pride." She looked down at the rune again, the twisted thorn seeming to pulse beneath her gaze. "Then we find the truth. Together." Draco nodded. "Together." Snow fell in silent layers over the Ministry of Magic, muffling the usual bustle of owls and apparating officials. Inside the Department of Mysteries, the air was sharper, colder than it should have been, unnatural. Hermione Granger stood before the veil, her breath curling in pale wisps as she studied the frost creeping along its ancient frame. It wasn't supposed to frost over. Nothing in this chamber ever changed, and yet, for the third week in a row, the temperature had dropped inexplicably, and now faint silver runes had begun to shimmer beneath the ice like secrets buried in snow. "They're appearing in bloodlines now," she murmured, more to herself than to the figure looming in the doorway behind her. The Malfoys were the first. Then the Greengrasses, the Knots, all pure-blood families with old oaths, bindings made in times no one remembers. Draco Malfoy stepped forward, his boots clicking against the stone, his pale face tight with restrained anger. "So the Ministry's theory is that my family cursed itself, and by some ripple effect cursed half the wizarding world. That's ridiculous, Granger, even for you." She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. "I didn't say that, but the first recorded case was your great-grandmother, Lucretia Malfoy. She vanished during the winter of 1891. The family records say she died of magical depletion. But there's no cause, no illness, no duel, just fading, like something drained her from within. And you think it's an oath?" His voice was colder than the rune. "I think there's a pattern. And your family crest appears in every archive related to the oldest blood-binding rituals. Ice magic, Draco. Forgotten magic. The kind that doesn't leave traces until now. He laughed, a short, brittle sound. You're digging through century-old myths while people are losing their magic, and you're pointing fingers at my name like it's some ancestral curse waiting to pounce. It's not about blame, she said, stepping closer. It's about understanding. This isn't prejudice, Draco. It's data. The frost only forms where there's unfulfilled magic, promises sealed with magic that were never honored, and your family made a lot of promises. To whom? He snapped. The wind? The moon? You sound like Trelawney after too much sherry. To each other, she said quietly, to enemies, to people they wronged. The oath I found, it was buried beneath the floorboards of Malfoy Manor's west wing, written in ice script. It said, by blood we bind, by silence we sever. So long as the debt remains, the line shall wither. That's not poetry, that's a curse. Draco's jowl tightened. For a moment he looked almost haunted. Then he exhaled sharply. And you think I know about it? I think you might, she said. Well, that someone in your family did. The manor has hidden rooms sealed by old magic. I need access. No. Draco. No, he repeated, sharper this time. You don't get to waltz in with your ministry badge and demand answers from my family's past like it's some open book. That house has seen enough ruin without you poking around in its scars. It's not just your family at risk, she said, her voice low but firm. My neighbor, Muriel Pruitt, can't even light a candle with her wand anymore. Her granddaughter found her weeping in the kitchen, clutching a dead wand like it was a lost child. This is happening, Draco. And if we don't find the source, more families will fall. He looked away, his gaze tracing the frost on the veil. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. And if the source is in my home, what then? Will the ministry seize it? Declare us cursed? Brand us as threats? No, she said. But I can't promise they won't try. That's why it has to be me. And it has to be now, before fear takes over. He studied her, really studied her, for the first time since she'd asked for his help. Why you? Why not Shacklebolt or Robards? Why not let the Aurors handle it? Because they see politics, she said. I see patterns. And because I believe there's a cure, not a punishment, a way to break the oath. But it'll take trust, on both sides. The silence stretched between them, brittle as the ice on the stones. Outside, the wind howled against the ministry's spires. Somewhere deep beneath their feet, a clock ticked, slow and steady, counting down to something neither of them could name. Finally, Draco exhaled. One day, you get one day in a manor, but you go alone. No ministry escorts, no tracking charms. And if you find nothing, then I walk away, she said. And I defend your family's name to the Wisengamot myself. He held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded. Once, be at the gate at dawn. And Granger? If this is a trap. It's not. Then don't make me regret this. The fire in the hearth of the Malfoy library had long since dwindled to embers, casting more shadow than light across the ancient tomes that lined the walls like sentinels of forgotten knowledge. Snow fell beyond the tall, arched windows, not the soft, drifting kind, but sharp, glittering flakes that clung to the glass like claws. Hermione sat on a low chaise, her fingers tracing the spine of a weathered grimoire, its leather cover, cold to the touch. Across from her, Draco stood with his back to the room, staring into the garden where the hedges had frozen into jagged sculptures, their leaves turned to glass. It wasn't always like this, he said, his voice low, almost reluctant. The cold, the silence. There was a time when even here, in this house, there was warmth. Not much, perhaps, but enough. Hermione looked up. What changed? He turned slowly, his gray eyes reflecting the faint glow of the dying fire. My ancestor, Lucien Malfoy. He lived during the Great Frost, a winter so severe it lasted 7 years. Wizards couldn't lift it. The ministry collapsed in the southern provinces. Entire villages vanished beneath the snow. She leaned forward. I've never read about that, because it was erased, he said. Or buried. The records were sealed, deemed too dangerous. But our family kept them, hidden beneath the ancestral crypts. And this vow? The one that started the curse? Draco exhaled, a pale mist curling from his lips. Lucian made a bargain. He was young, ambitious, proud. When the frost came, he saw not disaster, but opportunity. He believed that if magic itself could be frozen, only those strong enough to endure it would survive and rule. That's monstrous. He thought he was saving the wizarding world, Draco said. Not defending, merely stating. He journeyed to the northern wastes, to a place called Veilthorn, where the veil between magic and ice is thin. There he found the heart of winter, a shard of primordial cold, said to be the first frost ever breathed by the world. Hermione shivered, though not from the temperature. He bounded to our bloodline, Draco continued, swore an oath in his own blood and bone, that the Malfoys would carry the frost, guard it, wield it. In return, the heart would grant us power beyond measure, resilience, dominance, immortality in the cold. But it went wrong. It always does, he said bitterly. The heart didn't grant power. It consumed. It seeped into our magic, twisting it. Those who tried to use it too much, their spells turned brittle, their wands cracked. Their children were born with weaker cores, and now, centuries later, the oath is waking up again. It's searching for balance, and it's taking from every old bloodline, not just ours. As if the magic remembers the promise and demands repayment. Hermione rose, stepping closer. Why now? I don't know. Maybe because the world is warmer. Maybe because we've forgotten how to fear the cold. Or maybe, he hesitated, maybe because I never truly renounced the name, the blood, the legacy. You're not your ancestor, she said firmly. No, he agreed, voice quiet. But the magic doesn't care about remorse. It cares about oaths and blood. And Lucine's vow was written in ice, Hermione, literal ice, carved into the walls of Veilthorn. And it says, until the last air breaks the silence, the frost will claim its due. She studied his face, the weariness beneath his pride, the flicker of something vulnerable beneath the frost of his gaze. What does that mean? Break the silence? Draco looked away. I don't know, but I think it means confessing. Not to the world, to someone who matters, someone who can forgive. The silence between them deepened, but it no longer felt empty. It felt heavy with possibility, like the moment before snow begins to fall, when the sky holds its breath. And in that stillness, Hermione reached out, not with magic, but with her hand. Then maybe, she said softly, you've already begun. The air in the great hall hummed thick with the scent of burning beeswax and damp wool, but beneath it all, sharp and unmistakable, was the cold. Not the chill of an unseasonably frostbitten morning, but something deeper, older. It seeped from the stone floor, rising in ghostly tendrils that curled around ankles and clung to robes like desperate fingers. Hermione Granger stood at the edge of the crowd, her breath puffing in white wisps, as she watched Healer Salloway kneel beside the prone figure of Lady Alara Greengrass. She had seen the first case, Lord Thaddeus Knott, found slumped in his study, skin pale as winter marble, his wand reduced to a useless shard of ash. At the time it had been deemed an isolated tragedy, a rare magical collapse, perhaps the result of an unstable ancestral enchantment. But this was different. This was confirmation. Ilara's lips were blue. Frost feathered across her eyelashes, delicate as lace, and her fingers, once nimble at spellwork and embroidery alike, lay stiff and white upon the stone. A thin rime coated the hem of her emerald gown, spreading slowly outward like spilled ink on snow. Around her, the whispers of the gathered nobles rose and fell, fear dressed in hushed tones. She was fine at dinner, a witch murmured. Said she'd be joining the dueling circle later. Her son tried a warming charm, another replied. It sputtered out like a candle in a storm. Hermione stepped forward, her boots cracking faintly against the icy floor. Healer? Salloway looked up, his face drawn. Same symptoms. Magical core collapsed. No trace of external curse work, but there's residue. He held up a vial, inside of which swirled a silvery mist that pulsed faintly, like a dying heartbeat. Once not a spell. It's older, a binding, a vow, maybe. One that's turning on itself. Hermione's stomach tightened. Vows were dangerous, especially old ones, the kind etched in blood and silence, passed down through generations like heirlooms. The kind the ancient families kept buried. Any connection to Notch, she asked. Salloway hesitated. Not in blood, but in allegiance. Both families swore fealty to the Malfoys during the war, and before that, centuries back, they were signatories to the Winter Pacts. Hermione's breath caught. The Winter Pacts. A series of oaths forged during the great magical famines, when power was pooled and protected under lunar ice seals. Long-fought myth, but not, she realized with a slow dread, to someone like Draco Malfoy. She turned sharply, scanning the anxious faces, searching for one in particular. He wasn't among the Greengrass retinue. Not in the hall at all. Where's Malfoy? She asked aloud. A sneering voice answered from the archway. Looking for me, Granger. She turned. Draco stood in the doorway, cloaked in black, his pale hair tied back, his face unreadable. Snow dusted his shoulders, and his breath came in measured clouds. He didn't look surprised, only resigned. You knew, she said, stepping toward him. About this, about the Pacts. He didn't deny it. I knew they existed, didn't think they were still active. But they are, she pressed. And they're breaking, or being broken. Draco's gray eyes flickered to Alara's still form. For a moment, something like grief passed over his face, fleeting, but real. The oaths were meant to preserve, to bind us through sacrifice. But if the balance is broken, he trailed off. Then the ice takes back what was given, Hermione finished, the words chilling her more than the cold ever could. Around them, the frost continued to spread. A goblet on the high table cracked as ice bloomed through its stem. The torches dim. Hermione met Draco's gaze. We need to get into the Malfoy archives, he exhaled slowly. No one's been down there in over a century. The wards are unforgiving. Then it's a good thing I'm not afraid of a little danger, she said, already moving toward the doors. Draco fell into step beside her, his voice low. It's not the wards you should fear, Granger. It's what we might find. The fire in the Department of Mysteries flickered low, casting long shadows across the stone floor, as Hermione Granger traced a line of red thread from one name to another on the massive parchment spread before her. The air smelled of old ink, parchment dust, and something sharper, like frost caught between the pages of a forgotten book. She rubbed her fingers over the names: Greengrass, Knott, Zabini, Selwyn, all pure bloodlines, all now suffering the same inexplicable depletion. Magic that sputtered like a dying candle, children born with no wand affinity, ancestral wards failing across ancestral estates. She leaned back, pressing her palms into her tired eyes. For 3 weeks she'd been mapping connections, searching for the common root. At first the Ministry had dismissed it as isolated cases, stress perhaps, or generational decline. But when the Longbottoms reported a sudden weakening in their household enchantments, and then the Bones lineage began showing symptoms, even the most skeptical began to listen. The break came when she cross-referenced marriage records going back 2 centuries. Most of the affected families had intermarried at least once, but that was common among purebloods. It wasn't the marriages themselves, but the timing. In the wake of the First Wizarding War, nearly every one of these families had entered into a pact. Some formal, some whispered, all unregistered. A network of protection, perhaps, or mutual cover. But Hermione's eyes kept returning to one name, circled in charcoal at the nexus of the web. Malfoy. Not just any Malfoy. Abraxas Malfoy. She exhaled, her breath clouding slightly in the chill that had settled into the room. It wasn't natural. The temperature in the department never dropped this low, not even in winter. Yet frost feathered the edges of the parchment, delicate as lace, blooming where her fingers had lingered too long. A soft click echoed from the corridor. She turned, wand already in hand. Draco Malfoy stood in the doorway, his pale hair catching the dim light. He wore a dark traveling cloak dusted with snow, though it hadn't been snowing in London. His gaze dropped to the map, to the threads converging on his family name. I felt it, he said quietly. The cold, like something waking up in the walls of Malfoy Manor. Hermione didn't lower her wand. You knew. I suspected. My grandmother used to speak of an oath, something sealed in ice after the war. She said it was meant to protect us, to bind the old families together, but she never spoke of it in full. Just warnings. Don't break the line, she'd say. Don't forget the promise. He stepped forward, his boots leaving faint moisture on the stone, as though he'd walked through winter itself. When my father fell ill last week, when his magic wouldn't answer his wand, I thought it was guilt eating him alive. But now, he reached into his cloak and drew out a small, silver-bound book, its cover etched with runes that shimmered like frozen breath. This was hidden beneath the hearth in the east parlor. I didn't want to bring it, but I think it's calling to yours. Hermione finally lowered her wand. Calling? The parchment. The thread. They're humming, aren't they? You just don't hear it over the silence. She looked down. The red thread trembled, almost imperceptibly, as if pulled by an unseen current. And for the first time, she noticed the faint tracings beneath the ink, writing in a language she didn't recognize. But that made her skin prickle with cold recognition. This isn't just a map, she whispered. It's a response. The oath. It's reacting to us. Draco stepped closer, close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes, the tension in his jaw. Then we're already too late to stop it, but maybe not too late to understand it. Outside, the wind howled against the ministry's ancient windows, and deep beneath the earth, something ancient stirred in its frozen sleep. The snow fell soundlessly over Malfoy Manor, a hush so thick it pressed against Draco's eardrums like water. He stood at the edge of the courtyard, breath curling in pale wisps before vanishing into the dark. It wasn't supposed to snow here, not this early, not with such unnatural persistence. The frost had begun 3 nights ago, creeping up the stone steps, frosting the iron gates, clinging to the ivy like a second skin. And with it came the voices. At first he'd thought it was the wind, a low, sibilant murmur beneath the creak of ancient oaks. But tonight the air was still. No wind, no movement, just the slow, steady descent of snowflakes that didn't melt when they touched the ground. He heard his name, Draco. It wasn't his mother's voice, nor his father's. Though Lucius had been dead 2 winters now, his final breath choked with regret and something darker, something unspoken. This voice was older, brittle, a whisper pulled from the pages of a book, left too long in the damp. He turned slowly, boots crunching on ice-laced gravel. The courtyard was empty. The fountain, frozen mid-spray, stood like a sculpture of arrested time. Yet the whisper came again, closer now, as if spoken into the shell of his ear. You carry it, you carry the oath. Draco clenched his jaw. Show yourself. Silence. Then the snow began to shift. Not from the sky, but from the ground, rising in thin spirals, forming shapes that dissolved before they could be named. A hand, a face, a crest, a serpent coiled around a chalice, half hidden beneath frost. The Malfoy sigil, but not as he knew it. He stepped back, pulse thudding in his throat. This isn't real. It is more real than you know, the voice sighed, now seeming to come from all around him. You buried us. You silenced the truth. But ice remembers. A memory flickered, unbidden. He was 10 years old, standing in the same courtyard, watching his father kneel in the snow before a hooded figure. No words were spoken, but the air had trembled then too, thick with magic. His mother had pulled him inside moments later, her face pale. Do not speak of what you saw, she whispered. Not ever. Now the snow swirled faster, forming letters in the air, runes, archaic and jagged, glowing faintly blue. Draco read them slowly, his breath catching. By blood and breath, by frost and flame, we bind the line to honor's name. Should loyalty falter, let winter claim us. Should pride fall, let ice remain. An oath, a curse, buried in the foundation of their legacy. No, he whispered, that wasn't our doing. It was, the voice insisted. Your ancestor, Arcturus Malfoy. He swore to the Winter Coven in exchange for power, but power demanded purity, and when the bloodlines began to mingle, when alliances shifted, the oath awoke. Draco's hands trembled. He thought of his cousin Lysandra, now bedridden in St. Mungo's, her magic drained like water through cracked fingers. Of others, the green grasses, the rosiers, entire families weakened, their wands silent, all pure blood, all linked distantly to that same ancient pact. And now the frost was spreading, not just in the world. In him, He pressed a hand to his chest, where a cold weight had settled weeks ago, growing heavier each day. It wasn't illness, it was inheritance. The snow stilled. The voice softened. You are the last true heir, the only one who can face what was buried. Draco closed his eyes. And if I don't, then the winter will not end, and the magic of your line, the magic of all who soar, will freeze into silence. A gust of wind tore through the courtyard, scattering the snow, erasing the ruins. When he opened his eyes, the yard was empty again, just ice, just silence. But the cold inside him remained, and now, for the first time, it had a name: responsibility. He turned toward the manor, his breath steady now, resolve hardening, like frost on glass. Tomorrow, Hermione Granger would arrive. He had resisted her presence, resented her intrusion. But the visions, whatever they were, had made one thing clear. He could not do this alone. And perhaps, just perhaps, the warmth she carried, the stubborn, unyielding heat of someone who believed in second chances, was the one thing the ice still feared. The air beneath Malfoy Manor tasted of stone and silence, thick with the weight of centuries. Hermione's breath curled in front of her like smoke as she stepped carefully over a fracture in the flagstones, her wand tip casting a narrow pool of blue light across the damp floor. The descent had been treacherous, hidden behind a false wall in the East Library. A spiral staircase wound downward, its iron steps slick with frost despite the absence of any visible source. Draco followed close behind, his cloak drawn tight against the unnatural chill that seeped from the walls. This wasn't here 10 years ago, he murmured, fingers brushing the carved sigil beside the archway. I know every passage in this house, or I thought I did. This magic isn't meant to be found, Hermione said, her voice low. It's warded, older than the house itself, I think. Blood-based. That's why only a Malfoy could have triggered the entrance. Draco exhaled sharply. And only a Granger could have figured out how. She glanced back at him, the faintest ghost of a smile touching her lips before the cold pressed in again. The chamber ahead opened like a wood in the earth, circular, domed, its walls lined with runes carved in a script so ancient it made her eyes ache to focus. Ice clung to every surface, not the brittle kind of winter frost, but something darker, deeper, threaded with veins of silver that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. In the center, raised on a pedestal of blackened marble, lay a single parchment, folded and sealed with a wax emblem shaped like a serpent coiled around a frozen flame. The Oathkeeper's seal, Draco whispered, stepping forward despite himself. I've seen it in the family chronicles. A myth, a punishment. Hermione approached slowly, her fingers tingling with the pull of latent magic. Not a myth. It's real. Then it's bound to a vow, one that was never fulfilled. She reached into her satchel, pulling out a small silver mirror etched with detection runes. When she held it toward the parchment, the surface fogged over, then cleared to reveal words written not in ink, but in frost. By blood I bind, by ice I keep. No hand shall break what silence keeps. Until the dead is paid in breath, no Malfoy shall know life past death. Draco paled. That's not possible. That's not... My father never... He cut himself off, jaw tightening. It's not about your father, Hermione said gently. It's older. Look at the language. This predates the Ministry. Maybe even Hogwarts, she knelt, careful not to touch the pedestal. Someone in your lineage made a promise to a magical entity, something tied to winter, to silence, to oaths. And when they broke it, the magic turned inward. It's been leeching power from every descendant, generation after generation. That's why the bloodlines are weakening. The magic is being consumed as penance. Draco crouched beside her, his breath unsteady. So we're being punished for a lie someone 400 years ago told. Not just a lie, a betrayal. She pointed to the seal. See the serpent. It's not just a Malfoy symbol. It's a guardian. The oath wasn't made to another wizard. It was made to a frost warden, a being of ancient northern magic. They enforce promises. If one is broken, the consequence is this. He stared at the frozen flame in the seal. And the cure? Hermione hesitated. The oath has to be acknowledged, not broken, not denied. Acknowledged, and then forgiven. By both sides. The warden has to release the debt. Draco laughed. a brittle sound that echoed too loudly in the chamber. "So we need to find a mythical ice spirit, and ask it nicely to let go of a grudge older than the statute of secrecy. Possibly. But first, we need to understand what was promised, and what was lost." She reached into her satchel again, this time withdrawing a vial of liquid moonlight, shimmering like quicksilver. "This will let us read the full oath, but once it's opened, the chamber will know. The magic will react." Draco looked at her, really looked. At the dark circles under her eyes, the stubborn set of her mouth, the way her fingers trembled. Not from fear, but from resolve. "Do it," he said. "We've come too far to freeze now." The air in the Malfoy library was thick with the scent of aged parchment and frostbitten wood, each breath a sharp reminder of the unnatural cold that had crept into the very bones of the manor. Hermione's fingers trembled not from temperature. She had layered every warming charm she knew, but from the weight of what she was about to uncover. Before her, spread across the cracked surface of an obsidian reading table, lay the remnants of a scroll bound in silver thread that shimmered like hoarfrost. It was written in a dialect of ancient runes, older than even the Hogwarts archives could verify, etched not in ink but in something darker, something that pulsed faintly, like a frozen heartbeat. Draco stood near the hearth, arms crossed, his usual sneer absent. He had not spoken in nearly an hour, not since she'd pulled the scroll from its concealed casing behind a false panel in the east wing. His silence unnerved her more than any insult. "This isn't just a curse," Hermione murmured, tracing a symbol with the tip of her quill. "It's an oath, a blood vow, sealed in ice magic." Draco turned slowly. "An oath? What kind?" She hesitated. The runes were intricate, layered with protective indications, but twisted, like ivy choking a statue. It was meant to preserve the Malfoy line, to shield it from external threats, from betrayal, exile, magical erosion. But something went wrong. The magic, it turned inward. She pointed to a sequence near the center, where the symbols fractured into jagged lines. "This part, vinculum, urgelu, sanguis, non mendac. It means bound by frost. Blood does not lie." It was supposed to ensure loyalty, a vow that only true-blood Malfoys could uphold. "But look here." Her voice dropped. "The final clause is altered. Someone rewrote it. Instead of protection, it demands sacrifice. Every generation, the magic consumes a portion of the family's inherent power to sustain the ward. And now, it's accelerating." Draco stepped closer, his shadow falling over the parchment. "So we're not cursed, we're feeding it." "Yes," she said softly. "And the colder the world becomes, the stronger the oath grows. It's feeding on your lineage like a leech." A long silence settled between them, broken only by the faint crackle of ice forming along the window panes. Outside, the garden, once lush and meticulously kept, was now a glass garden of frozen roses, their petals locked mid-bloom. "I didn't know," Draco said, and for the first time Hermione heard something raw in his voice, not defensiveness. "Regret. My father never spoke of this. Grandfather, he burned half the family grimoires after the war, said some knowledge was better lost." She looked up at him. "He might have thought he was protecting you, but magic like this doesn't disappear. It waits." She turned back to the scroll, flipping to the margins where a smaller script had been added, later, by a different hand. The ink was black, but it wept tiny beads of frost as she studied it. "Wait," she whispered. "There's a condition, a loophole. The oath can only be broken by one who bears the blood and speaks the truth the magic was meant to protect." Draco frowned. "What truth?" Hermione's gaze flicked to him steady. "Not just any truth, a truth that requires sacrifice, one that forces the speaker to relinquish pride, to admit guilt. This wasn't just about blood purity, Draco. It was about remorse. The magic was designed to endure only as long as the family upheld its honor. But when that was corrupted, when power became more important than integrity, the oath turned punitive." He exhaled sharply, staring at the runes as if they might bite him. "So to end it, someone has to stand before this thing and say, 'What? That we were wrong? That we failed?'" "Yes," she said, "and mean it." The room seemed to grow colder. A single icicle cracked from the ceiling and shattered on the floor like dropped glass. Draco closed his eyes. "It wasn't just my father," he said quietly, "or my grandfather. I believed it too. For years, I thought blood made us better, safer. I used it like a weapon." Hermione said nothing. She waited. When he opened his eyes, they were brighter than usual, glassy, perhaps from the cold or something else. "If saying it will stop this, stop the frost, stop my mother from feeling weaker every winter, then I'll say it." She reached out, her head hovering just above his. "It has to come from you, but you're not alone." He looked at her, then down at the cursed scroll, the legacy of ice and arrogance. And for the first time, Draco Malfoy took a breath, and began to speak. The morning light in the Ministry's restricted research annex was thin, strained through high, frost-rimmed windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in decades. Frost spiderwebbed across the glass, pulsing faintly with residual magic, as though the building itself were slowly succumbing to the same chill that had hollowed out the veins of old wizarding families. Hermione stood over a low obsidian table, one hand braced against its surface, the other gently tracing the edge of the parchment. It lay flat but not still. Its surface shimmered like a frozen lake under moonlight, the ink shifting in slow hypnotic patterns, forming and reforming ancient runes in a language even Hermione had only read about in fractured fragments. Draco stood beside her, arms crossed, jaw tight. He hadn't spoken in nearly 20 minutes, but his presence was a weight, tense, watchful, like a blade balanced on its tip. "It's not just a curse," Hermione murmured, more to herself than to him. "It's a plea, a memory. The oath wasn't made in malice, it was made in fear." Draco's voice was low, raw. Fear of what? Before she could answer, the heavy oak doors at the end of the annex groaned open, splintering the silence. 3 figures strode in, their ministry robes emblazoned with the silver sigil of the Department of Magical Threats. At their head was Corvin Thorn, a tall man with iron-gray hair and a gaze like flint. He carried a lead-lined case under one arm. "Granger," Thorn said, stopping at the foot of the table. "We're taking it." Hermione didn't move. "You can't. Not yet. This parchment is the only tangible link we have to the source of the frost. Destroying it without understanding its mechanics could accelerate the spread. We've already lost 3 more lines this week. Greengrass, Selwyn, Rosier. Their magic is collapsing like sandcastles in a tide." Thorn's expression didn't waver. "Precisely why we can't risk it. It's a cursed object of unknown origin, potentially sentient. Standard protocol demands immediate incineration under controlled conditions." "It's not an object," Draco said, stepping forward. His voice was quiet, but edged with something Hermione hadn't heard before. "Defiance, yes, but also ownership. It's a record. Of my family. Of a promise my ancestor made when the world was tearing itself apart. You burn it, you don't just destroy a curse. You erase history, and maybe the only way to fix it." Thorn turned to him, eyes narrowing. "Malfoy, you realize your family's name is all over the petitions to have this suppressed. Half the Wizengamot wants it gone before it tarnishes any more legacies. And the other half," Hermione interjected, "is terrified because their children can barely cast Lumos. This isn't about legacy. It's about survival. The frost follows bloodlines bound by old oaths. Oaths that were never fulfilled. This parchment isn't the cause. It's a symptom. And if we destroy it without understanding what it's reacting to, we could trigger a backlash that spreads the curse to neutral lines." Silence settled, thick and brittle. Thorn exhaled through his nose. "You're asking me to let a known magical hazard remain active in the hands of the only 2 people who've made any progress on it." Hermione finished. "Yes, because we found patterns in the runes, cycles, emotional signatures. It responds to honesty, to acknowledgement. Last night, when Draco spoke his ancestor's true name aloud, Abraxan Malfoy, the frost on the parchment receded by nearly a centimeter." Draco glanced at her, surprised. He hadn't expected her to reveal that. Thorn studied them both, then the parchment, its surface now faintly glowing, as though listening. "You have 48 hours, he said at last. "Then it goes to the Fen Zhu Lu, no exceptions." Hermione nodded, but her fingers curled slightly at her side. "Understood." As the officials turned to leave, Draco let out a slow breath. 48 hours, he said. "So, what's next?" She looked at him, really looked, At the shadows under his eyes, the way his usual arrogance had worn thin to something closer to resolve. "We find the rest of the oath," she said, "and we make it answer not to blood, but to truth." The parchment shimmered, and for a moment the air around it warmed, just enough to melt a single thread of frost from the window pane. The air in the Malfoy library had grown so cold that each breath fogged before Hermione's lips, crystallizing into tiny shards that fell like brittle snowflakes onto the ancient ledger beneath her fingers. The book, bound in what looked like frozen dragon hide, had resisted every unlocking charm she knew, until Draco, his voice unsteady, spoke a name in a language that sounded like wind through frozen branches. The moment he did, the ice binding the pages cracked open, revealing a vow etched, not in ink, but in frost that shimmered with a faint blue light. "We should not have opened it," he murmured, stepping back as the temperature dropped further. Hermione rubbed her arms, teeth chattering. "It's already done. We need to know what this oath says." Before she could lean in again, the frost on the page began to rise, swirling like smoke, until it coalesced in the center of the room. The shape solidified slowly, a man in archaic wizard's robes, his face sharp and pale, eyes like chips of glacier ice. His presence didn't bring warmth, but a deeper chill, as if he carried winter within him. Draco stepped forward, jaw tight. "Who are you?" The ghost's gaze settled on him, recognition and sorrow flickering in his spectral eyes. "Alaric Malfoy, of the Northern Branch. I bound the oath you have disturbed, and for your ignorance, I do not blame you. It was meant to be forgotten." Hermione kept her wand low but ready. "What oath? What did you do?" Alaric turned to her, and for a moment she felt the weight of centuries pressing down. "A vow of protection," he said, "but one forged in pride and fear. When the old wars raged, when blood purity was both shield and weapon, my line swore an oath upon the eternal frost, to preserve our legacy at any cost. We invoked the ice, bound our magic to it, and in doing so, cursed ourselves." Draco's voice was quiet. "You froze your own magic?" "No," the ghost said, sharper now. "We bound it, so that none could betray the family without losing everything. The magic would retreat into the ice, leaving the traitor and their bloodline weakened. But the oath was never meant to last beyond a generation." "Then why is it still active?" Hermione asked. "Because it was never fulfilled, nor broken, only buried. And now the ice stirs. It senses doubt, fear, change, and it is spreading." Draco ran a hand through his hair. "So every pure-blood family feeling the fatigue, the wand instability. That's because of your oath." "It is a ripple," Alaric said. "The magic remembers its chains, and it seeks to enforce them. But the world has changed. The oath cannot hold forever. Yet to break it, there is a price." "What price?" Hermione insisted. The ghost's form flickered, as if the answer pained him. "The one who breaks the vow must offer something of equal weight. Memory, or magic, or a life willingly given. The ice demands balance." "That's absurd," Draco snapped. "You'd have someone die just to undo a mistake?" "It was not a mistake," the ghost said, voice rising with a wind that sent scrolls tumbling from their shelves. "It was sacrifice. And though I see now the folly of it, the oath cannot be undone lightly. If you seek to dissolve it, you must go to the heart of the vow, the mirror of first frost, beneath the northern crypts. But know this, once you stand before it, there is no turning back." "And if we don't?" Hermione asked, though she already feared the answer. "Then the frost will claim all who bear the old blood. Not in days, not in months, but in years. Every descendant of those who once swore allegiance to such oaths will fade. Their magic will sleep. Their lines will end." Draco looked at Hermione, his eyes gray with dread. "So we either let the wizarding world wither, or one of us pays the price." The ghost nodded slowly. "Or both. The ice does not bargain. It only takes." A long silence followed, broken only by the soft crackle of frost spreading across the book's pages. Outside, the sky had darkened, and the garden beyond the window glittered with unnatural rime. Hermione closed her eyes. "Then we go to the crypt. We find the mirror, and we face it, together." Alaric's form began to fade, but his voice lingered, a whisper on frozen breath. "Beware. The ice remembers more than oaths. It remembers guilt, and it knows your hearts." The wind howled like a wounded beast across the frozen moors, biting through layers of enchanted wool and dragonhide, with cruel precision. Hermione pulled her scarf tighter, the tip of her nose already numb despite the warming charm she'd cast twice. Before them, rising from a drift-laden valley like the ribs of a long-dead giant, stood the snow-choked spire of the old Cairn Library. Only the topmost runestone remained visible, its ancient Ohamic script half-buried, pulsing faintly with blue light beneath the frost. "We should have apparated closer," Draco muttered, his breath fogging the air as he adjusted the strap of his satchel. His silver-blonde hair was dusted with snow, and his usual smirk was replaced by a tight frown. "You said the wards would allow it." "They would have, if they weren't already failing," Hermione snapped back, though she regretted it instantly. She exhaled slowly, focusing on the crunch of snow underfoot. "The wards were tied to the bloodlines. If the frost is spreading as we think, then the magic that protects this place is weakening. We're lucky we made it this far." Draco didn't answer. He just stared at the ruin, his jaw working slightly. His family name was carved into the lower stones. She'd seen the partial inscription when the wind cleared a patch of snow. Malfoy, among others, now worn away by centuries and ice. The entrance was a collapsed archway, half blocked by a fallen pillar. Hermione drew her wand, murmuring a charm that made the ice on the stone glow briefly before cracking and receding. "It's a blood seal," she said, "older than Hogwarts. It used to bide knowledge to lineage here. Only those descended from the founding patrons could enter." "And you're sure I qualify?" Draco asked, voice low. "Your great-great-grandmother was a McFusty," she said, glancing at him. "They were one of the 7 guardian houses. That makes you eligible, but so do I. My maternal line traces back to the MacLeods. Ancient, but not noble." "Not noble," he almost smiled. "Then what am I doing here with you?" "Survival, Malfoy, not class. Now come on." They squeezed through the gap. Inside, the cold was sharper, drier, as if the air itself had been preserved in a tomb. The chamber unfolded into a vast domed hall, its ceiling lost in shadow. Towering shelves made of black petrified wood stretched in concentric circles toward the center, where a frozen fountain stood. Its carved serpents coiled mid-strike, mouths open in silent hisses, encased in ice. Hermione lit her wand. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing scrolls bound in iron, books sealed with wax the color of dried blood, and stone tablets stacked like firewood. "This is it. The lost archives of the Northern Covenant. They kept records of all blood oaths sworn above the 33rd parallel. And the oath that cursed my family is here?" Draco asked, stepping forward. His boots scuffed a patch of frost that shimmered like crushed glass. "If it exists, it is. But oaths like that, they wouldn't be written in ink. They'd be inscribed in something living, something that remembers. Like ice," he said quietly. She looked at him. "Exactly." They moved toward the center. The fountain's basin was ringed with runes, now cracked and dark. Hermione knelt, brushing away frost with gloved fingers. "These are binding runes. Old Norse. They say, 'What is sworn in cold shall thaw only in trust.'" Draco crouched beside her. "Trust? That's the cure? Not some rare herb or forgotten incantation?" "Not just any trust," she said. "Look." She pointed to a smaller inscription beneath the basin. "By blood unbroken, yet hand in hand with the once scorned, shall the ice yield." It's poetic, but clear. The oath was made by a Malfoy, probably during the witch hunts, when your family sided with the Purgers. And it can only be undone by a Malfoy. And someone they once rejected. Someone like me, Hermione said softly. Draco met her gaze. The torchlight from their wands cast shifting shadows across his face, blurring the lines between enemy and ally, boy and man. "You always were the one I underestimated, Granger, and you always mistook pride for strength," she replied. A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with the weight of things unsaid. Outside, the wind screamed against the stones, but here, in the heart of the frozen archive, there was only the soft rasp of breath and the slow, inevitable drip of a single drop of water falling from the serpent's fang into the hollow beneath. The air in the Malfoy archive was sharp, with the scent of vellum and frost, each breath a thin blade in Hermione's lungs. The great stone chamber, buried beneath layers of earth and enchantment, had not been opened in over 2 centuries. Dust lay thick on the shelves, but it was the ice that unnerved her most. Feathered tendrils creeping along the spines of ancient tomes, crystalline blues blooming from the inkwells, as though the very knowledge within had frozen solid. She pulled her woolen cloak tighter, her fingers aching as she turned the brittle page of the scroll before her. Draco stood across the table, his face half in shadow, the silver of his hair catching the dim, blue-tinted light of the ward lamps. He hadn't spoken in over an hour. His silence was no longer the sneering quiet of their school days, but something heavier, watchful, pained. "This isn't just a curse," Hermione whispered, her voice barely stirring the cold. "It's a covenant, and it was never meant to harm." "Not at first." He looked up. "Then what was it meant for?" She traced a line of faded script with her gloved fingertip. The ink shimmered faintly, responding to her touch like a pulse beneath skin. "Protection, the Malfoys. Your ancestors bound themselves to a pact during the War of the Hollow Veil, when bloodlines were being used as weapons, traitors within families selling secrets for power. They swore an oath, a vow written in ice, sealed with magic and memory. They promised to protect the purity of their blood, not by arrogance, but by loyalty. Any betrayal, even a thought of disloyalty, would be met with magical severance." Draco exhaled slowly, his mouth a pale cloud. "So the magic punishes betrayal by draining magic from the bloodline." "Yes, but it's gone wrong. The original intent was to isolate the traitor, to sever only their magic. But over generations, as the blood thinned and the spell was passed down, it fractured. Now it lashes out at everyone. Even those who've done nothing." He stepped closer, his boots crunching faintly on a thin crust of frost that had formed along the floor. "And the ice? Why ice?" She hesitated. "Because oaths bound in emotion, especially guilt, regret, they take form. Ice is still, silent, unforgiving. It doesn't melt easily. It preserves, and it imprisons." A long silence settled between them, broken only by the soft crackle of freezing parchment. Draco reached into his coat and withdrew a small silver locket, its surface etched with a spiral that mimicked frost patterns. "My mother gave me this the night before her magic failed. She said it belonged to Celine Malfoy, the one who first cast the oath. I thought it was just another relic. But it's warm, even here." Hermione's eyes widened. "May I?" He handed it over. The locket hummed faintly against her palm, a vibration like a heartbeat. She pried it open. Inside, no portrait, only a sliver of frozen breath suspended in crystal, and beneath it 2 words in delicate script. "Remember loyalty. That's not just a reminder," she murmured. "It's a key. The oath was never meant to be broken by force. It was meant to be undone by truth, by someone remembering what loyalty truly means, not blind allegiance, but choice, trust." Draco looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since they'd entered the archive. "And you think we're the ones who have to do it?" "I think," she said softly, closing the locket, "that the magic knows when a promise has been kept, not out of fear, but out of love. And if we can find the original vow, the exact words, spoken in the right place, with both of us bearing witness, then maybe, just maybe, we can thaw it." Outside, the wind howled against the buried walls, as if the mountain itself were resisting. But here, in the stillness, something fragile had shifted. Not just the fate of bloodlines, but the space between them, narrowed, warmed, by something neither could yet name. They stood in silence, the locket pulsing gently between them, like a promise waiting to be kept. The air in the Malfoy library was never truly still, even when the house slept. Dust motes swam in the pale light of a lunar lantern, drifting like frozen stars above the rows of ancient tomes bound in cracked leather and iron. Draco stood at the threshold, breath shallow, as if entering might disturb something far older than silence. The frost had reached this room now, thin veils of ice blooming across the spines of books, delicate as lace, cold to the touch. He hadn't come here since his father's arrest, not until tonight. Hermione had spoken of patterns, of bloodlines weakening in rhythm with the moon, of whispers in old spells that mentioned the oath beneath the hearth. He had scoffed at first, superstition, the ramblings of tired minds, but then the ice had crept into his own veins during the last full moon, a sharp hollow ache beneath his skin, as though something inside him was slowly freezing solid. That night, he dreamt of his father kneeling before a frozen altar, whispering in a language Draco didn't know, but somehow understood. Now he stepped forward, boots echoing on the marble. His fingers brushed the nearest bookshelf, recoiling at the chill. He pulled a volume at random, The Covenant of Northern Blood, and the pages cracked like thin ice when he opened it. A folded scrap of parchment fell out, yellowed and brittle. His father's handwriting, precise, cold, familiar. They say the oath was made in winter's heart, when the old magic still listened, to bind the Malfoys to purity, to power, to silence. But oaths leave echoes, and echoes become curses. Draco's pulse quickened. He remembered fragments, really. Late nights as a boy, slipping past closed doors, catching the low murmur of Lucius's voice. Not reading to his mother, not plotting with Death Eaters. No, something quieter, something forbidden. He once stood outside the study, pressed against the wood, listening as Lucius said, "It's not blood that weakens us, it's the refusal to atone." He hadn't understood then. He thought it weakness, shame. Now he walked deeper into the library, following a path only memory could trace. Behind a false panel in the east wall, disguised as part of a family crest, was a hidden compartment. His hand trembled as he pressed the serpent's eye. The stone clicked. The panel slid open. Inside lay a small ice-locked chest. Not magical ice, not frost from winter. This was different, translucent, almost alive, pulsing faintly with a blue light. He reached for it. But the moment his fingers neared, a memory tore through him. He was 10. Snow fell beyond the manor windows. Lucius stood before the hearth in the drawing room, wand lowered, face pale. Narcissa watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. Draco had followed her, curious. The fire had gone out, though it had burned bright moments before. In its place an intricate pattern was carved into the stone, runic, ancient, glowing faintly blue. "Father?" Draco had asked. Lucius didn't turn. Some promises are not made to be kept, Draco, but broken oaths do not fade. They wait. And then, the memory shifted. Lucius, older, thinner, standing over a book, much like the one Draco now held. His hands were gloved, his voice, a whisper. "I tried to sever it. I renounced the name. I burned the sigil. But the ice remembers. The blood remembers." Draco gasped. Stumbling back from the chest, his breath fogged the air. The ice pulsed again, and for a heartbeat he saw a face within it. His father's, but younger, anguished. He closed his eyes. The weight of generations pressed against his chest. This wasn't just a curse, it was a confession. A legacy buried in silence, in pride, in fear. And now it was his to face. He reached into his coat, fingers closing around the small vial Hermione had given him. Potion of clarity, brewed from moon petal and phoenix ash. "To see what's hidden," she'd said, "but only if you're ready." He uncorked it, drank. The world shattered into light and memory. The fire in the hearth of the Malfoy study had long since dwindled to embers, casting flickering shadows across the stacks of ancient tomes and brittle scrolls that now covered every surface. Frost still crept along the edges of the windows, thin and ghostly, like breath on glass. Hermione rubbed her hands together, her breath visible in the cold air, despite the protective warming charm she'd cast 3 times already. It never lasted. The cold here wasn't natural. It clung to the house like a memory, seeping into bones and parchment alike. Across the low table, Draco sat hunched over a journal bound in silver-threaded leather, his pale fingers tracing a line of runes etched in what looked like frozen ink. His hair had fallen forward, shielding his face, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the slight tremor at his hand when he turned the page. He hadn't spoken in nearly an hour, but the silence between them no longer felt like hostility. It was something else, careful, almost fragile, like the ice patterns on the wall, that might shatter if touched too suddenly. "You're certain this symbol means binding?" he asked at last, voice low, rough from disuse. Hermione leaned closer, squinting at the rune. "It's an old variation, not in any of the standard texts. But yes, it's related to oaths, not just spoken ones, but blood oaths, the kind that survive generations. He exhaled sharply. So it's true then. My great-grandfather didn't just make a promise. He sealed it, with magic. With our magic. She looked up at him. It's not your fault, Draco. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a small vial filled with what looked like swirling mist. My mother gave me this. After the last attack, when Aunt Lucretia couldn't lift her wand, she said it was all she had left of the original vow, a memory trapped in ice. Hermione's breath caught. That's incredible. If we can extract the memory, if it's strong enough, it might show us what he swore, and why. She hesitated. You trust me with it? He met her eyes then, gray and stormlit. I don't have a choice, and strangely, I want to. The admission hung between them, quiet but heavy. She nodded, careful not to make it more than it was. And yet, it was more. It was the first time he'd handed her something without suspicion, without sarcasm. It was trust, thin as ice, but holding. They worked through the night, brewing the delicate extraction potion together, her stirring counterclockwise, him adding powdered moonstone at precisely the third simmer. Their movements, once clumsy in their forced cooperation, had settled into a rhythm. When her hand brushed his as they reached for the same vial, neither of them pulled away. By dawn, the potion shimmered a pale blue, and the memory began to rise from the vial like fog over snow. Draco's hand found hers, not in fear, but in solidarity. Whatever it shows, he said, we face it together. And for the first time, Hermione believed they could. Snow fell in silent sheets over the ruins of Elderglin Hollow, each flake catching the pale light of a waning moon-like shards of glass. Hermione Granger pulled her cloak tighter, breath curling in front of her in wisps of silver fog. The parchment in her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the magic pulsing beneath her fingertips. It was old, older than Hogwarts, older than the Ministry itself, drawn on a skin of ice-burnished vellum that refused to crease or tear. The winter map. It had been hidden behind a false panel in the Malfoy family library, sealed with a charm that responded only to a drop of blood from each line it had touched. Hers had burned like frostbite when she pricked her finger. Draco's had glowed faintly blue before the compartment sprang open. Now, beneath the shifting ink lines, 7 crimson dots pulsed like slow heartbeats. Each one marked a place where the frost had first taken root centuries ago. Villages swallowed by ice, towers cracked down the middle, entire families found motionless, their wands cold and useless in their hands. This one, she murmured, tracing the nearest mark with her thumb. Crescent Tor. It's less than a mile from here. Draco stood a few paces behind her, his silver-blonde hair dusted with snow. He hadn't spoken since they apparated into the valley. His eyes, usually sharp with sarcasm, were distant, as though he were listening to a voice only he could hear. You feel it too, don't you? She asked. He exhaled slowly. It's in the blood, like an echo. My great-grandfather wrote about this place in his journals. Called it a silent sanctuary. Said the land remembered things we'd rather forget. Hermione studied the map again. The ink wasn't static. It moved. Rivers of frost-blue thread wove themselves across the surface, connecting the 7 points in a spiral that tightened toward the center. A place marked only by a single frozen room. Draumer. I think it's a warning, she said. Or a boundary. This spiral, it's not just mapping the past. It's predicting the next outbreak. Draco stepped closer, his boots crunching on the frozen undergrowth. Then we're already too late. The Ministry's latest report mentioned a case in Hogsmeade. A third-generation witch couldn't so much as light a candle. Hermione's stomach tightened. She thought of Neville, of Molly Weasley, of every witch and wizard whose magic was not just skill, but identity. To lose it was to lose a part of the soul. We need to move, she said. Before it spreads further, they followed the path uphill, the map glowing faintly in Hermione's hand, guiding them through the skeletal trees. The air grew colder with every step, not the biting cold of winter, but the deep, unnatural chill of magic gone wrong. Frost climbed the trunks in delicate branching patterns, as though something were breathing through the wood. At the crest of the hill, the ruins of Crescent Tor came into view, a ring of standing stones, half buried in snow, their surfaces etched with runes that shimmered under the moonlight. In the center, a shallow depression had formed, filled with ice so clear it looked like a frozen pool. Draco stopped at the edge of the circle. "This is where they made the oath." Hermione turned to him. "Who?" "Our ancestors. The 7 pure-blood families. Malfoy, Lestrange, Rosier, Selwyn. Yours aren't among them, by the way." She ignored the jab. "An oath about what?" He stepped forward, his voice low. "To preserve blood, to protect the old ways. They bound it in ice magic, unbreakable, eternal. But magic like that, it demands balance. And when we started to change, when families intermarried, when blood wasn't pure anymore," he trailed off. "It took revenge," Hermione finished, realization dawning. "The frost isn't a curse, it's a consequence." The map trembled in her hands. One of the crimson dots, Hogsmeade, flickered, then dimmed. Another had appeared, smaller, pulsing weakly, near Ottery St. Catchpole. Draco looked at her, his face unreadable. "We're not just chasing a cure, Granger. We're trying to undo a promise that's been kept for 500 years. And somewhere beneath the ice, something stirred." The wind howled across the lake like a banshee trapped in the ice, its voice slicing through the thick wool of Hermione's cloak and biting at her cheeks. Silvermere lay before them, a vast expanse of glassy frost, its surface cracked in jagged patterns that shimmered under the weak winter sun. Trees stood frozen mid-motion, limbs outstretched as if caught in a scream, their bark glazed with rime. Nothing moved, not a bird, not a ripple. Even the air felt brittle, as if speaking too loudly might shatter it. Draco walked ahead, his boots crunching on the snow-laden path that spiraled down to the lake's edge. He didn't look back, but Hermione knew he felt her presence, the way his shoulders tensed, the slight hesitation in his step, when she stumbled on a hidden route beneath the snow. "This is it," he said, voice low. "The village of Elderglen, buried under the ice. They say on the coldest night of the year, if you press your ear to the lake, you can hear them whispering." Hermione wrapped her arms around herself. "And you believe that?" "I didn't," he said, turning to face her. "Until last week, when my mother started dreaming of this place, waking up screaming about frost in her lungs." She studied him, the pallor beneath his usual cool composure, the shadows under his eyes. This wasn't the Draco Malfoy who sneered from behind polished arrogance. This was someone stripped raw by something older than pride. She stepped forward, pulling her wand. Lumos. The light flickered, then steadied, casting long blue shadows across the ice. There should be a marker, a runestone. If the archives were right, the oath was sealed here. They moved in silence, scanning the frozen surface. The cold seeped into Hermione's bones, but it was more than temperature. It was a presence, a weight that pressed against her chest, as if the lake itself were watching. Then she saw it. Half buried in a drift, a slab of black stone jutted from the snow. Carved into its face was a spiral, tight and cold, with words etched in a language she recognized from the Malfoy grimoires. Ancient High Saxon, the tongue of binding oaths. Draco knelt beside it, brushing snow away with gloved hands. His breath fogged in the air. "By blood and breath I swear," he read aloud. "My line shall bear the frost, that the balance may be kept. That's my ancestor, Lucian Malfoy." Hermione crouched beside him. "He made this oath. But why? What balance?" Draco didn't answer at first. His fingers trembled as they traced the letters. He wasn't the first to swear it. He was the last to uphold it. The story was never meant to be told. But they came here, wizards from the old northern clans. They believed magic was leaking from the world, thinning like mist. They thought a sacrifice could bind it back. And Lucian agreed. He didn't, not at first, but they threatened his family, his wife, his daughter. Draco's voice cracked. He offered himself instead, swore an oath in ice so pure it never melts. And when he died, the lake froze overnight. The village, everyone in it, vanished. Hermione's breath caught. They weren't killed. They were bound. Part of the seal. He nodded. The frost isn't a curse. It's a memory, a promise that feeds on guilt. And now, it's waking up again. A gust swept across the lake, and the ice groaned beneath them, a deep, mournful sound, like stone, grinding against bone. From somewhere beneath the surface, A whisper threaded through the wind. "Break it." Hermione looked at Draco. His eyes were wide, silver with fear, and something else, recognition. "They're still alive," he whispered. "Trapped in the vow." She reached for his hand, ungloving her fingers to press warmth into his. "Then we find a way to release them, together." He didn't pull away. For the first time he let her hold on. The wind howled through the skeletal trees of the Malfoy family grove, carrying with it the brittle scent of frostbitten bark and the low, persistent hum of magic gone wrong. Hermione pulled her woolen scarf tighter around her neck, breath puffing in white clouds as she stepped forward, boots crunching on a carpet of frozen leaves. The ground here was different, stiff, glassy, as if the earth itself had been dipped in mercury and left to harden. She could feel it beneath her feet, a dull throb of restrained power, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Draco walked a few paces ahead, his silver blonde hair catching the weak winter light, like strands of spun moonlight. He didn't speak much these days, not since the elders began to falter. His mother, once sharp and poised, now struggled to summon even a simple warming charm. The Malfoy name, once a shield, had become a curse. "This is where the first breach was recorded," he said, voice flat. "Beneath the old well." "The one sealed during the war." Hermione nodded. She'd read the archives, pored over crumbling parchments, written in high archaic, the kind of language that curled at the edges of comprehension. The vow, spoken centuries ago by a Malfoy ancestor during a blood winter pact, was etched not in ink, but in ice. A magical contract bound by sacrifice, guilt, and a promise to keep the bloodline pure, even if the world forgets the cost. But no one remembered the full text. Only fragments remained. She knelt by the well's rim, now encased in a dome of translucent ice that shimmered with inner light, like trapped lightning. Her fingers hovered above it, not quite touching. The cold radiated upward in waves, sharp enough to make her teeth ache. Then she heard it, a whisper, faint, fractured, as if rising from deep beneath water. "By blood and breath, by frost and flame, I bind the name, I bear the blame." Hermione froze. Draco turned sharply. "Did you—" "Shh!" She held up a hand, heart hammering. The voice came again, clearer this time, a man's voice, weary and ancient. "The oath must stand, even when the snow forgets the sun." It was rising from below the ice, echoing not in her ears, but in her bones. She pressed her palm flat against the frozen surface. The ice didn't burn. It welcomed her, strangely, like a hand meeting a long-lost kin. "Who are you?" she whispered. Silence. Then, "You hear me?" "Yes," she said, louder now. "I hear you." Draco crouched beside her, wary. "Granger, don't." "It's not a trap," she said, though she wasn't sure. "It's a memory, or a soul bound to the vow." The voice returned, trembling. Only one with truth in her blood may break the ice, not by force, but by knowing. "Knowing what?" Hermione asked. "The lie we buried, the child we cast beneath the frost, the one whose name was erased." Hermione glanced at Draco. His face had gone pale. "There was a child?" she asked. "The firstborn," the voice said. "Not pure enough, not by their reckoning, so they silenced him, bound his magic in ice, and with it they swore the vow to protect the bloodline by any means. But the ice remembers, and so do I." A gust of wind shrieked through the grove, and the ice beneath Hermione's hand shimmered, revealing, for a fleeting moment, the outline of a face, youthful, pleading, mouth open, in a silent cry. Draco staggered back. "That's not possible. There's no record." "Because they burned it," Hermione said softly. "They buried the truth, and now the magic is turning on them, demanding balance." The voice beneath the ice grew quieter, fraying like old thread. "Break the vow, not by ending it, but by speaking his name. Speak it, and the frost will know it was heard." "And the name?" she asked. A long pause, then barely audible. "Castian." The air in the Malfoy crypt was not just cold, it was predatory, gripping the edges of robes and sinking into bones like slow poison. Frost spiderwebbed across the stone walls, pulsing faintly with a light that was neither blue nor silver, but something older, something hungry. Hermione tightened her grip on the iron-bound lantern, its enchanted flame flickering as if reluctant to burn in this place. Before them loomed the door, carved from blackened yew and sealed with rooms that wept ice. It had taken weeks to locate this hidden chamber beneath the ancestral mausoleum, months of sifting through half-rotted scrolls, deciphering ciphers written in forgotten tongues. And now it was Draco who stood before the threshold, his breath visible in short, steady clouds. "This won't be clean," he said, voice low. "The lock isn't just magical, it's bound to blood and memory." Hermione nodded, though her pulse hammered at the base of her throat. "Do what you have to." He exhaled sharply and drew a thin silver dagger from within his coat. Its blade bore a spiral pattern, worn with age, and at the hilt a single opal that caught the dim light like a dying star. This belonged to Hermione Malfoy. He swore the oath that started all this. They say he wept frost when he died. She watched as Draco pricked his palm, the blood welling dark against his pale skin. He pressed his hand flat against the center of the door, where a sigil, 3 interlocking circles bound by a serpent, slowly absorbed the crimson. The ice flared, spreading like veins across the surface, and the runes began to shift, rearranging themselves into a language, neither Latin nor Parseltongue, but something older, something that made Hermione's teeth ache to hear. Draco began to speak. His voice was rough at first, then stronger, shaped by syllables that twisted unnaturally on the tongue. The words tugged at the air, pulling the cold into spirals, drawing it toward the door. The frost cracked. A low groan echoed from the stone, as if the earth itself remembered the weight of that broken promise. Hermione took a step back, her fingers brushing a wand at her side, not in threat, but in instinct. The magic here was not like Hogwarts, not like the Ministries. This was older, wild. Then, silence. The door sighed inward, just an inch, and a gust of wind rushed out, carrying the scent of snow-laden pine, and something sweetly metallic, like old blood. The ice receded, peeling back like a curtain. Beyond the threshold lay a chamber choked with frost, its walls lined with frozen tapestries, depicting scenes of oaths sworn beneath winter stars. At its center stood an altar of white stone, carved in the shape of a heart pierced by a broken wand. Hermione stepped forward, her boots crunching on crystalline dust. "This is it," she whispered. "The source." Draco followed, his face pale, eyes fixed on the altar. They'd bury it, not to protect the world from it, but to protect the family from the truth. She turned to him. "What truth?" He swallowed. "That the oath wasn't made to gain power. It was made to hide a crime. Arian, he didn't bind himself to ice to strengthen the bloodline. He did it to silence a murder. The first frost wasn't magic. It was guilt, and it never stopped spreading." Hermione's breath caught. Around them, the air shimmered, and for a moment, they were not alone. Shadows flickered at the edge of vision, figures in long robes, faces blurred by time, whispering in voices like wind through frozen trees. One reached out, a hand of ice, and brushed the edge of her sleeve. She didn't pull away. "We can't just destroy it," she said softly. "It's not just a curse, it's a memory." Confession. Draco looked at her, really looked, at the quiet resolve in her eyes, the way she stood despite the cold, despite the weight of history pressing down on them. For the first time, he didn't see an intruder in his family's shame. He saw someone willing to carry it with him. Then he reached for her hand, his fingers numb but certain. "Then we listen." The air in the Malfoy archive tasted of frost and old parchment, each breath a sharp pull into the lungs. Moonlight, pale and strained, filtered through the high-arched windows crusted with rime, casting long skeletal shadows across the rows of ancient tomes. Hermione stood at the center of the circular chamber, her fingers tracing the edge of a stone pedestal, where a single book lay open, its pages not paper, but sheets of preserved ice, etched with silver runes that pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat beneath glass. "This is it," she whispered, more to herself than to Draco, who stood a few paces behind, his breath visible in plumes. The vow, the original. He stepped closer, his polished boots clicking against the stone, the sound too loud in the stillness. His face, usually composed into a mask of indifference, was drawn tight with something deeper, unease, perhaps, or dread. "I've never seen it outside of family legend," he admitted. "They said it was destroyed after the war." "It wasn't destroyed," Hermione said, her voice low. "It was hidden, preserved. Magic like this, it doesn't just vanish." She reached out, then paused. The cold radiating from the icebook was unnatural, deeper than winter, older than memory. It reminded her of the Dementors, not in terror, but in the way it leached warmth from the soul. "Don't touch it bare," Draco warned, pulling a silk-lined glove from his coat. "My grandmother once said the vow remembers betrayal. It burns those it deems unworthy." She took the glove, nodding. "And you?" "I'm a Malfoy," he said, though there was no pride in his voice. "It may not burn me, but that doesn't mean it won't hurt." With gloved hands, she turned the first page. The runes shifted, rearranging like living things, and a whisper filled the chamber. Not in any language she knew, yet she understood. "By blood and breath, by frost and flame, I bind my name to this vow, that love unbroken shall stand eternal, and loyalty unshaken shall outlive time. Should I falter? Should I turn? Should I break faith with those I have sworn to protect? Then let winter claim my line. Let warmth fade. Let magic wither. Let the world forget us." Hermione exhaled slowly. It wasn't meant as a curse, she realized. It was a promise, a binding of love so absolute that betrayal would be unthinkable, because the cost would be unbearable. Draco moved to stand beside her, his gaze fixed on the shimmering script. "Arcturus Malfoy," he murmured. "My 7th great-grandfather. He made this vow to his wife Lyra. She was a seer. They said she saw the fall of our house. The greed, the alliances with dark powers, the betrayal of old oaths. He swore he would never let it happen, that his blood would remain pure not in bloodline, but in loyalty." "Love, not purity," Hermione corrected softly. He looked at her then, really looked, his gray eyes reflecting the cold light, but something warmer flickering beneath. "Yes, love." A crack echoed through the chamber. The ice beneath their feet groaned. They turned. The runes on the page flared, and a whisper returned, louder now, layered with voices. Dozens, hundreds of Malfoys passed, all bound by the same vow, all failing in some small way. A marriage entered for power, not love. A secret kept from a sibling. A promise broken in silence. "The frost," Hermione said. "It's not punishment for one betrayal. It's the weight of centuries of small fractures. The vow was meant to preserve love. But your family, you've spent generations denying it, hiding it, trading it for control." Draco closed his eyes. "We were taught strength was in distance. That emotion was weakness. And now the magic believes you never loved at all." Silence fell, thick and heavy. Outside, snow began to fall soundlessly beyond the frosted glass, blanketing the estate in white. After a long moment, Draco reached out, not to the book, but to her hand, gloved but deliberate. "Then maybe," he said, voice quiet, "the only way to break the curse is to prove it wrong." She looked down at their hands, then up at him. "By loving someone," she said, despite everything. He didn't look away, despite blood, despite history, despite pride. Despite fear, she thought. But she didn't say it. She only squeezed his hand, and for the first time in centuries, warmth began to gather at the edges of the ice. The first reports had come quietly, whispers in the ministry corridors, scribbled notes passed between healers at St. Mungo's. Pure-blood families, old and proud, began waking to cracked teacups, their magic too weak to mend the simplest charms. Then came the frost. Not the kind that gathers on windows in winter, but something deeper, something that seeped through stone and bone alike. It started in the Reese estate, then the Yaxley, the Rosiers, families whose names were etched into the foundation of wizarding society. Their hearths would not light, their wards flickered and died, and when touched, their skin bore the chill of deep earth. Hermione stood in the ministry's restricted archives, her breath curling in pale wisps, as she unrolled a brittle scroll sealed in ice-blue wax. The parchment crackled under her fingers, ancient ink shimmering like trapped starlight. The words were in High Arcane, the dialect of oaths and blood rites, and it took her 3 translation spells to parse the first sentence. "By blood given, by blood unbound, let the winter of silence fall." Her stomach tightened. This was no curse born of malice. This was a vow, twisted by time and guilt into something hungry. She had been summoned 2 days prior, pulled from her research on magical preservation to lead an emergency inquiry. Kingsley's voice had been grave, It's spreading, Hermione, and Hogwarts has reported ice in the East Tower. Now standing before the Malfoy family registry, its pages rhymed with delicate, creeping frost, she felt the weight of what they were facing. This wasn't just weakening. It was erosion, a slow unmaking. A sharp knock echoed through the archive chamber. The door swung open, and Draco Malfoy stepped in, his coat dusted with snow that hadn't been falling outside. His face was paler than she remembered, the usual arrogance dulled by something closer to dread. "You found it," he said, not a question. Hermione didn't look up. "I found something. An oath, Draco, from the 14th century. Your ancestor, Lucien Malfoy, bound it during the War of Hollow Wands. He swore to protect a secret, something about the lineage, about balance, but the magic turned inward. It's feeding on the blood it was meant to protect." He walked closer, his boots crunching faintly over the frost-laced flagstones. "And you think it's waking up now because, what? Bloodlines are thinning? Or because someone broke the terms? Or because someone remembered?" She said softly. "Magic like this doesn't vanish, it waits." A silence settled between them, thick with the cold, and the unspoken history, the war, the mud on his shoes at Malfoy Manor, the way he'd looked at her, once, just once, after Voldemort fell, like he wanted to say something that never came. Outside, the enchanted windows of the archive dimmed. The frost had reached the ministry's outer walls. She could see it now, tendrils of silver blue creeping along the stonework like veins. "We need to go to the ancestral vault," Draco said finally. "Beneath Malfoy Manor, there's a mirror there, speculum sanguinis. It shows the truth of a bloodline. If the oath is ours, it'll know." Hermione turned to him. "You're saying your family hid this?" "I'm saying," he said, voice low, "that we were never taught the whole story. Only the pride, never the price." She studied his face, the shadow beneath his eyes, the tension in his jaw. This wasn't the boy who called her a mudblood. This was a man who had spent years outrunning his name, only to find it catching up in ice and silence. "All right," she said. "We go to the manor, but if this is a Malfoy curse, Draco, it won't just take your family. It'll take everyone tied to that blood. Your son Scorpius." His breath hitched, just slightly. "I knew," and in that quiet admission, Hermione felt the first real thaw, not in the room, not in the world, but in the space between them. Trust, fragile as a thawing pond, beginning to form. The library of the Department of Mysteries was not supposed to hold secrets from the ministry, but this one had slipped through the cracks, literally. Frost curled along the spines of ancient tomes, creeping like ivy across the marble floor, its breath a silent whisper in the still air. Hermione stood at the center of it, her breath visible in pale wisps, fingers tracing the edge of a crumbling Malfoy family grimoire. The ink on the page shivered with unnatural cold, the words shifting when not looked at directly. Old magic, the kind that remembered blood and betrayal. Draco stood by the archway, arms crossed, his usual arrogance dulled by something quieter. Resignation, perhaps, or dread. He had not spoken in nearly an hour, not since they'd deciphered the final clause of the oath. So long as guilt remains unacknowledged, the frost shall claim the line one generation to the next. "It's not just about the past," Hermione said, her voice low. "It's about silence, denial, the refusal to speak the truth." Draco exhaled sharply. "And what truth would you have me speak, Granger? That my grandfather bowed to a madman? That my father trembled before a snake? We all know it." "No," she said, turning to face him. "Not just that. The oath was made in blood. It demands atonement. Not from the dead, but from the living. And it's not just Malfoy's, it's draining. The Bones, the Rosiers, even traces in the Longbottom line. Anyone tied by old alliances, old oaths sworn in fear." He looked away. "So what now? We hold a family therapy session in the atrium." She ignored the sarcasm. Her fingers tightened around the page. "There's a way to slow it. A temporary transfer." Draco's head snapped toward her. "What?" "The curse feeds on inherited guilt. But magic recognizes intent. If someone willingly takes the burden, knowingly, without blood ties, it might accept a host. Just for a time. You saying you want to absorb it?" For a few days. Long enough to find the anchor point. The ritual site where the oath was first sealed. That's suicide. It's controlled risk. I've studied the runes. There's a counter-charm for extraction, but it has to be done before the 7th dawn. As long as we work fast. You're mad. His voice cracked. You can't just volunteer for a curse, like it's a bloody internship. I'm not volunteering lately. Her eyes held his steady. I've spent years learning how magic binds to emotion. This isn't just dark magic. It's grief, Draco. Frozen grief. And I believe it can be thawed, but not while it's spreading unchecked. He stepped forward, the frost crunching under his boots. And if the counter-charm fails, then you'll have to finish the work without me. Don't say that. The words came out raw. Don't stand there and talk about dying like it's a footnote in one of your books. She softened. I know what I'm asking, but if we do nothing, more families will fall. Children.
Their son, he flinched. I'm not doing this to absolve you, she said gently. I'm doing it because someone has to step into the cold so others don't have to. The silence stretched, the frost pulsing faintly, as if listening. Finally, Draco reached into his coat and pulled out a silver dagger, Malfoy crest etched into the hilt. Then we do it properly. Hermione blinked. You're not seriously... The oath was sworn in blood. You want to break its rhythm? We answer with blood too. Not yours, mine. A willing offering, from a Malfoy who finally says the words. He pressed the blade to his palm, and before she could stop him, drew a shallow cut. Blood welled dark crimson against his pale skin. I acknowledge it, he said, voice trembling but clear. I acknowledge the shame, the fear, the choices made in silence. I carry them, and I refuse to let them poison the future. The frost shivered, and for the first time, it did not spread. The library of the Malfoy ancestral estate was not meant for warmth. Stone shelves rose like frozen sentinels into the vaulted dark. Their spines cracked with age, ink faded to whispers. Frost curled along the edges of forgotten tomes, not from cold but from the curse itself, seeping through parchment, breathing slowly into the world. Hermione pressed her palm against one such volume, leather brittle as bone, and felt the shiver beneath her skin. The sigils inside pulsed faintly, a rhythm that matched the dull ache behind her temples. It was spreading, faster now. She had been researching alone for 3 days, surviving on cold tea and stubbornness, but the magic resisted her. Every incantation she attempted to reverse unraveled halfway, as if repelled by something deeper than spellwork, by blood, by oath, by memory. You're exhausting yourself, Draco said from the doorway, voice low, almost gentle. She didn't turn. It's not your problem. It's in my blood. It's in my name. That makes it mine as much as yours. She finally looked at him. He stood in shadow, but his eyes caught the dim light, gray like storm clouds, over a frozen lake. There was no smirk, no sarcasm, just weariness and something else. Resolve. I don't need your guilt, she said sharper than she meant to. This isn't guilt, he replied, stepping forward. It's responsibility, and you don't get to carry it alone. He reached into his robes and withdrew a slender dagger, silver, etched, with runes that shimmered when the firelight touched them. The oath of winter, he said. It binds with blood and magic. To break it, we have to speak it together. But to survive speaking it, we have to share the weight. Hermione stiffened. That's dangerous. If our magics clash. They won't, he said. Not if we mean the same thing. She stared at him. And what do you mean? He didn't look away. That it's time to stop running from who we were. Then to start choosing who we want to be. The air between them felt charged, brittle. She knew the risks. A shared spell of this magnitude could burn them both, could twist their magic, leave them powerless, or worse. But she also knew she was running out of time. The frost had reached the edge of Hogsmeade. 3 children from old families had already lost their ability to cast even the simplest charms. She exhaled. What do I need to do? Draco knelt before the central rune circle they had drawn in salt and ash, the ancient words glowing faintly beneath their feet. He placed the dagger in the center. We each offer a drop of blood. Then we speak the oath, not to break it, but to understand it, to answer it, and we do it together, hand in hand. She hesitated only a moment before kneeling beside him. Their fingers brushed as they reached for the blade. She flinched. His skin was cold, but not from the room. "One cut," he said softly. "One voice, one will." She nodded. They pricked their fingers in unison. A single drop from each fell onto the dagger's edge, and the runes ignited with a soft blue light. The circle beneath them hummed, vibrating up through their bones. Then they began. The words were in old high arcanum, guttural and ancient, each syllable pulling at their chests like a thread through a wound. Hermione felt the magic rise not just from her but from him too, as their voices wove together, imperfect, raw, but steady. The frost along the bookshelves began to retreat, inch by inch, as if recoiling from the sound. But the cost came quickly. Pain lanced through her skull, sharp and sudden. She gasped, her vision swimming with images. Her mother's hands, warm and steady. Draco as a boy, standing rigid in a grand hall while his father spoke of purity and power. A woman in white robes weeping in the snow, her voice lost beneath the wind. Draco gripped her hand tighter. "Don't let go," he whispered, voice strained. "Keep speaking. Keep breathing." She clung to the rhythm of the words, to the pressure of his fingers, to the fragile warmth where their skin met. Around them the air thickened with memory, with sorrow, with centuries of silence. And then something shifted. The magic no longer fought them. It listened. The final word fell from their lips in unison, and the dagger shattered into 1,000 silver shards, each one dissolving into mist. For a long moment there was only silence. Then, slowly, the frost on the books began to melt. The fire in the hearth sputtered, its embers dimming like dying stars, and Hermione pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders. The library of Malfoy Manor had never been built for comfort, only for display. High-vaulted ceilings, marble floors and bookshelves, carved from black walnut that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Outside, the grounds lay buried beneath a layer of unnatural frost, delicate as lace and cold enough to blister bare skin. It had been 12 hours since they'd last spoken without snapping at each other. Draco sat across from her, slumped in a high-backed chair, his pale fingers tracing the cracked spine of a grimoire older than Hogwarts. His usual composure had eroded. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and a faint tremor ran through his hand as he turned the page. He hadn't eaten since morning, neither had she. "You should rest," Hermione said, her voice softer than she intended. He didn't look up. "So should you, Granger." "But here we are." She exhaled slowly, watching her breath curl into the chilled air. "We're not getting anywhere like this. The spell isn't in these texts. It's not in the syntax of the incantations. It's in the intent. The oath was made in grief, not magic. We need to understand why it was made, not just how." Draco finally lifted his gaze. "And how do you propose we do that? My ancestors weren't exactly journal keepers. They were secretive, proud, and damn good at burying their shame. Then we start with what we have." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a brittle scroll, wrapped in ice-blue ribbon. This was tucked behind a portrait in the east wing. "It's not a spell, it's a letter. From Arcturus Malfoy, to his brother, written the night before the first frost appeared in 1482. His jaw tightened. "You went into the East Wing. That's been sealed for generations. It wasn't locked." She placed the scroll on the table between them. "And it wasn't empty. There were children's toys in there. A wooden dragon, a chipped teacup. Someone lived there. Someone they didn't want remembered." Draco stared at the scroll as if it might bite him. His voice was low. "My great-aunt Kalia. She was erased from the family tapestry. They said she'd disgraced the name. Married a Muggle-born healer from Hogsmeade. There was talk of a child." Hermione watched him carefully. The frost started spreading through bloodlines 2 weeks after Kalia vanished. And now it's returning. Only this time it's not just Malfoys. The green grasses, the rosiers, even distant branches like the Selwyns. It's targeting anyone bound by old oaths. Old guilt. He rubbed his temples. "So we're not just looking for a counter-curse. We're digging up a murder. I think she's still out there," Hermione said quietly. "Not alive, but not at peace. The frost isn't a punishment. It's a plea." Draco laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You sound like a bloody ghost therapist. And you sound like you're terrified of being right. The silence that followed was thick, brittle. Then, unexpectedly, he stood and walked to the sideboard, where a silver tray held a teapot gone cold. He tapped it with his wand. Nothing. With a muttered curse, he poured 2 cups anyway, and added a drop of warming draught from a small crystal vial. "Here," he said, placing one in front of her. "Don't expect me to do this often." She took it, surprised. "Thank you." He sat again, cradling his own cup. "I used to hate you, you know. Not because of blood, not really, but because you made everything look easy. You opened books and found answers. You walked into a room and people listened. I had to claw for every scrap of respect." Hermione stirred her tea, watching the steam rise. "And I used to think you were everything wrong with the world. Arrogant. Cruel. But you weren't the one who cast the curses. You were just trying to survive." He looked at her then. Really looked. No sneer, no mask. "We were both children. We were," she said. "But we're not anymore." Outside, the wind howled against the stained glass, and the ice on the window panes curled into new, intricate patterns. Like veins, like roots, like the fragile beginnings of something trying to grow. Snow sifted through the cracks in the stone ceiling of the hidden chamber beneath the Malfoy family crypt, drifting like ash onto the iron-bound chest between them. Hermione exhaled, her breath curling in pale wisps as she brushed frost from the lid with gloved fingers. The air tasted of iron and old magic, sharp, metallic, like blood frozen on steel. "This is it," she whispered. "The original covenant." Draco didn't answer. He stood just behind her, his back rigid, eyes fixed on the sigil carved into the chest, a serpent coiled around a frozen rose, encased in ice that never melted. His family crest, yes, but this was older. Older than the Malfoys, older than Hogwarts, perhaps. Hermione lifted the latch. It groaned open, releasing a breath of cold so intense it made her teeth ache. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in black silk, tied with silver thread that glittered like frost. She hesitated. "You don't have to do this alone," Draco said, voice low, rough at the edges. She glanced at him. In the dim, blue-tinged light of the ever-burning rooms along the walls, his face looked hollow, haunted. She'd seen that look before, once, in the astronomy tower. But this was different. This wasn't fear. This was grief. "I know," she said, "but someone has to." Her fingers trembled as she untied the knot. The silk parted like a wound opening, revealing letters, yellowed parchment, fragile as moth wings, tied with a ribbon of ice that hadn't thawed in centuries. She lifted the first. The handwriting was elegant, looping, feminine. "My dearest Alaric," it began. Draco stiffened. "Alaric Malfoy, my 7th great-grandfather," Hermione read on, her voice soft, careful. "You swore upon the heart of winter that you would return. You swore upon the frozen rose that your love would outlast time, that no spell, no war, no force of man or magic could break it. And yet the frost crept in the night you left. It climbed the walls of my chamber, sealed my window shut with ice. I heard your voice calling, but it was not you. It was the wind wearing your face." She paused. The words shimmered faintly as she read, as if the ink were alive. Draco stepped closer. "She was a winterblood," he murmured. "A witch of the northern sanctuaries. They could speak to ice, shape it like breath. The ministry called them heretics, the Malfoys. We made pacts with them. For power." Hermione turned the page. "You said you loved me, but love does not bind with curses. Love does not chain a soul to a vow carved in eternal frost. When I learned what you'd done, how you'd used my name, my blood, to forge a shield for your lineage, I tried to break it, but the oath had already taken root. It feeds on loyalty, Alaric, and when loyalty turns to betrayal, it turns to cold." A single tear slipped down Hermione's cheek. It froze before it hit the parchment. Draco's voice was barely audible. "The Frostblood curse. It wasn't meant to protect. It was meant to punish. And it only activates when a Malfoy betrays the family's name, or chooses someone over it." Hermione looked up. Like choosing love, he met her gaze, like choosing someone who wasn't pure, someone like her, someone like he. He stopped, but she heard it. "Someone like you." She reached for the next letter. This one was in a different hand, sharper,
angular. Cassiopeia, it began. You call it betrayal, I call it survival. Our world is ending. The Ministry hunts your kind. The war is coming. I bound the oath to protect us, to protect our child. Did you think I wanted this? The frost in my veins? The silence in my dreams? I would burn the world to hold you again. But the vow is made, and it cannot be undone, only fulfilled. Hermione's breath caught. There was a child. Draco nodded slowly. One never recorded, erased from the lineage. Because she chose love over blood. A silence settled between them, thick as snow. The cold gnawed at their bones, but neither moved. Then, from the back of the bundle, Hermione pulled a final sheet, smaller, folded. When she opened it, the words were faint, almost gone. To the one who finds this, when the frost returns, the oath dies not with denial, but with sacrifice. Not of blood, not of pride, but of love freely given to one the world would have you scorn. Break the ice with warmth, not fire, not force, trust. That is the key. Hermione looked at Draco. His eyes were bright, wet, but defiant. Funny, he said, voice cracking. All this time I thought the curse was in the blood, but it was in the lie. That we were better, that we were alone. She reached out, slowly, and took his hand. His fingers were cold, but as she held them, the ice on the walls began to weep. The air in the Malfoy library had thinned, each breath a sharp intake of frost that clung to the back of Hermione's throat. Scrolls had cracked like old branches overnight, their ink running as if weeping. The curse was no longer content with mere traces. It pulsed now beneath the floorboards, threading its way through the foundation stones like roots of a frozen vine. She knelt beside a shattered basin of moonstone, its liquid contents, once a luminous blue, now clouded with ice that shimmered like ground glass. Her fingers hovered above it, not daring to touch. Draco stood by the arched window, his silhouette outlined against the sky the color of tarnished silver. He hadn't spoken in nearly an hour. When he finally turned, his voice was low, frayed at the edges. It's worse in the East Wing. Astoria can't hold a wand steady anymore. The boy, Scorpius, he woke up screaming last night, said he saw shadows made of breath. Hermione swallowed. It's not just attacking magic, Draco. It's feeding on something else. He stepped closer, his boots crunching on a thin layer of rime that hadn't been there 10 minutes before. Hatred. Fear. That's how curses work. You know that better than anyone. No, she said, shaking her head. Not this one. I've been reviewing the bloodlines, those affected, those spared. It's not the ones who've done the most harm who fall first. It's the ones who remember it, who regret it. A silence settled between them, heavier than the cold. Outside, the wind moaned through the skeletal trees of the estate, their branches brittle with frost. You're saying it feeds on guilt? Draco asked, his tone sharp with disbelief. I'm saying it lives on it. She reached into the satchel at her side, pulling out a small, silver-bound journal. This belonged to your great-grandmother, Elspeth Malfoy. I found it buried beneath the ancestral vault. She wrote about a ritual, something performed during the First Wizarding War. Not to protect the family, but to preserve its purity. She spoke of a vow sworn in ice, bound not by magic alone, but by sorrow. A promise that if the line ever faltered, if it ever questioned its path, the blood would pay for it, not with death, with memory. Draco looked ill. She regretted it. That's what you're saying. She regretted what we stood for, and that's what woke this thing. Hermione met his gaze. Not just her, others too. Your father, after Azkaban. Even you, perhaps, though you'd never say it aloud. The curse doesn't care about what you've done. It cares about what you wish you could take back. He turned away, jaw clenched. And what happens when there's nothing left to regret? When the guilt's bled dry? Then the magic dies with it. She paused. Or the person does. A long moment passed. Snow began to fall, not from the sky, but from the ceiling, drifting down like ash from a cold fire. The walls groaned as ice spread across the tapestry behind them, the Malfoy crest now half buried beneath a veil of frost. Draco exhaled, a white plume curling in the air. So to break it, we have to erase the regret. No, Hermione whispered. We have to face it, not deny it, not bury it, but hold it, without letting it consume us. He looked at her. Then, really looked, her hands red from the cold, her hair wild with static, her eyes fierce with a kind of quiet understanding he had no name for. And if we can't, then the frost wins. She stepped forward, closing the distance. But I don't believe that. Regret isn't weakness, Draco. It's memory with a heartbeat. And maybe, just maybe, that's the only thing warm enough to melt ice made of silence. Snow fell in silent waves over the ministry atrium, though no sky could be seen. The enchanted ceiling had been replaced with a sheet of frosted glass, crackling faintly with restrained magic. Hermione stood at the edge of the fountain, her breath forming small clouds as she read the parchment clutched in her gloves. The ink shimmered like hoarfrost, the decree signed in 7 ministry seals. "They can't do this," she whispered. "They can," came a voice from behind her, low and edged with something between resignation and fury. Draco stepped forward, his coat lined with silver thread, his face paler than the snow outside. "And they will if we don't give them a reason not to." Hermione turned. "The Malfoy Manor is centuries old. It's not just a house, it's a repository. Spells, records, blood oaths sealed in stone. If they bring it down, half of wizarding history collapses with it. And yet," Draco said, stepping closer, "my family's name is the one they blame. As if we conjured this curse out of spite." His jaw tightened. "They've already taken my mother's wand, confiscated it for evaluation. You know what that means." Hermione did. It meant suspicion. It meant containment. It meant fear dressed as justice. "They're scared, Draco. This frost, it's not just weakening magic, it's unraveling bloodlines. The Weasleys, the Longbottoms, even traces in the Bones family. When magic starts failing in children who've just received their letters, people panic. And they look for someone to burn," he said bitterly. "Preferably someone with a history of bad choices." She studied him. There were shadows beneath his eyes. She hadn't noticed before. Not just from sleepless nights, but from something deeper. Guilt, maybe, or grief. "You didn't know about the oath," she said softly. "No," he admitted. "But I should have. It was hidden in a winter vault, beneath the east wing. No one's entered it in over 100 years. My great-grandfather sealed it after the war, said some memories were too dangerous to keep. And now it's leaking," Hermione murmured, "like a wound left untended." A cold wind swept through the atrium, though the doors were shut. The frost on the ceiling pulsed, veins of blue light flickering like a heartbeat. "A warning. They've set the deadline for 2 days," Hermione said. "Demolition crews at dawn. They'll use demolition runes and fire charms to burn through the magical wards. Once the structure falls, the oath's anchor breaks, but so does everything else tied to it." Draco exhaled sharply. "You're telling me they'd rather erase the past than understand it. I'm telling you they don't believe there's time to understand it." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "But I do, and so do you. The oath wasn't made in malice, it was made in fear. A promise to protect the bloodline at any cost. But magic doesn't understand nuance. It only knows the letter of the vow. And now it's enforcing it," Draco said, "by freezing everyone connected to it. Not everyone, only those who still carry the old magic, the ones whose ancestors were bound to the Malfoy line through alliance, marriage, or debt." He looked at her, really looked. "You've been researching. Every night since you showed me the fragment in the library, the runes. It's not just a curse, it's a contract, and contracts can be renegotiated. But not if the house is rubble. No." She touched his arm briefly. "We go back, tonight. Before the demolition crews arrive, we find the core of the oath, the original inscription. If we can speak to it, if we can offer a new condition, then maybe we can stop the frost without destroying the past." Draco was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "The winter vault opens only to blood and sorrow. You'll need me, and I'm not asking you to do it alone." She met his gaze. "We go together." Outside the snow thickened. Inside the frost on the ceiling pulsed once more, slower now, as if listening, as if waiting. The air grew sharp the moment they passed through the crumbling archway, as if the world had exhaled and frozen mid-breath. Hermione pulled her cloak tighter,
breath curling in white wisps before her. Around them, the garden lay imprisoned beneath a crystalline hush, trees encased in glassy frost, their branches suspended like shattered chandeliers, and flowers frozen mid-blue, their petals translucent and brittle. Even the fountain at the center, once carved from white marble and shaped like a coiled serpent, was a sculpture of ice, its waters stilled in mid-spiral. Draco stepped forward, his boots cracking faintly against the frozen ground. He did not look at her. "This was her sanctuary," he said, voice low. "My mother's, she used to say magic lived differently here. Softer, like it remembered what it meant to grow." Hermione studied the garden, her fingers twitching at her side. She could feel it, the faint, almost imperceptible pulse of old magic beneath the ice. But it was strained, distorted, like a song played beneath layers of wool. "She enchanted this place?" "Not all at once," Draco said, walking toward a frozen rosebush, its crimson blooms locked in silent defiance. "She added to it over the years. Charms to make the seasons bloom out of order, a spell to keep the air sweet in summer. Even the birds sang differently here." He reached out, hesitated, then brushed a finger against a petal. It did not break, but a web of fine cracks spread beneath his touch, glowing faintly blue before sealing again. "It's resisting," he murmured. Hermione stepped carefully over the frost-laced path, her eyes scanning the garden's edges. "This level of preservation, it's not just cold, it's a ward, a containment." "Of what?" Draco asked, turning. She met his gaze. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's tied to the oath, the frost spreading through the bloodlines. It echoes this, same magical signature. Layered, ancient, bound by intent." He looked away, jaw tight. "My father would have hated this place. Then it makes sense he never found it." A brittle laugh escaped him. "No, mother kept it from him. Said some things were too fragile for men like him to understand." Silence settled between them, broken only by the distant creak of ice shifting in the trees. Hermione moved toward the fountain, kneeling beside its frozen base. She pressed her palm against the ice, whispering a diagnostic charm. The air hummed, and for a moment the surface flickered, images flashing beneath. A woman in silver robes walking barefoot across dew-damp grass, a child's hand slipping into hers, laughter ringing like bells. Then it was gone, swallowed by frost. Draco was beside her now, his face unreadable. "She used to bring me here when I was small, before Hogwarts, before everything." Hermione looked up. "Did she ever speak of the old oaths, the ones your family swore?" He exhaled slowly. "Only once. Late at night, when she thought I was asleep. She whispered something about a promise made in winter, sealed in ice, that would one day demand repayment. I thought it was just a story." "It wasn't," Hermione said softly. "And the garden, it's not just frozen. It's waiting. For what? For someone to remember. To understand." She stood, arching frost from her knees. "Draco, this place, it's not just a memory. It's part of the oath. Your mother bound something here, didn't she? A counter-charm? A safeguard?" He stared at the fountain, then closed his eyes. "She said love could thaw ice that magic alone could not. I thought she meant metaphorically." Hermione reached for his hand, surprising herself. Maybe she didn't. Their fingers tangled, cold at first, then slowly warming. Around them the garden seemed to hold its breath, and deep beneath the ice, something pulsed, once, softly, like a heart remembering how to beat. The wind howled like a wounded animal, clawing at the stone walls of the abandoned watchtower, perched high in the northern moors. Snow piled against the cracked window panes, sealing them in a cocoon of white. Inside, the fire sputtered, casting long shadows that danced like phantoms across the rostron stones. Hermione sat with her back against the cold wall, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the flames flicker in Draco's tired eyes. He hadn't spoken in hours, not since they'd stumbled in, half-frozen, after the path vanished beneath a sudden storm. The map had led them here, to the ruins of a forgotten sanctuary tied to the old Malfoy oath, and now they were stranded, the wind screaming through the cracks like a chorus of lost voices. Draco sat on the opposite side of the hearth,
his cloak pulled tight, his breath visible in the frigid air. He stared into the fire, not blinking, as if trying to read something in the embers. "It's not just magic that's dying," he said at last, his voice low, rough from disuse. "It's us, the old families. We're crumbling from the inside out." Hermione frowned. "The frost is a curse, not a judgment." "Isn't it?" He turned to her then, his face pale, shadows carved deep beneath his eyes. "You think this just fell from the sky? No, it's memory, it's guilt, the oath, the one carved in ice beneath the Malfoy crypt. It wasn't just a vow, it was a binding, and it's been waiting." She shifted, the stones biting into her spine. Waiting for what? For someone to remember, to atone. He let out a bitter laugh. "We were taught loyalty above all, blood purity, tradition, but we never spoke of what those traditions costs. The lives, the silences, the things buried beneath generations of lies." Hermione watched him, really watched him. Not the boy who'd tormented her at school, not the man whose name still carried weight in every ministry hearing, but someone hollowed out by inheritance. "I used to believe we were better," he whispered. "Not good, but better. That if we just held the line, if we kept the name intact, something would survive. But now I see it was all rot. And the frost, it's not punishing the living. It's punishing the dead, and we're just the ones who have to feel it." A log cracked in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. Outside, the wind shrieked, shaking the old stones. "You're not responsible for what your ancestors did," Hermione said gently. "Aren't I?" He looked at her, his gray eyes sharp with pain. "I inherited their wealth, their name, their magic. I lived in their house, sat at their table, spoke their words. I didn't stop them. I didn't even try, not until it was too late. And now, when the magic fails, when children wake up unable to cast a simple warning charm, do you think the world sees me as a victim, or as the last heir of a curse?" She didn't answer. There was no easy answer. Draco leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I'm afraid, Hermione. Not of the cold, not of dying, but of being unforgivable, of standing before all of it, the blood, the silence, the pride, and realizing no amount of regret can thaw what's been frozen for centuries." The fire dimmed, the shadows grew. Hermione stood, crossed the small space, and sat beside him. Not too close, but close enough. "I don't know if forgiveness is the point," she said. "Maybe it's not about erasing the past. Maybe it's about choosing what comes next. You're here, you're trying. That counts." He looked at her, searching her face. "Why do you believe that?" "Because someone once told me," she said softly, "that we're only as good as the choices we make when no one's watching." He let out a slow breath, almost a sigh, and for the first time in days the cold didn't seem quite so deep. The silence in the Malfoy library was no longer oppressive but fragile, like the thin skin of frost on a winter pond. Hermione sat cross-legged on the rug before the hearth, her fingers tracing the spines of ancient tomes pulled from the ice-famed shelves. The fire crackled low, its warmth a defiant echo against the creeping cold that had seeped into the very stones of the manor. Across from her, Draco stood by the window, his breath forming mist in the air. He hadn't spoken in nearly an hour, but his presence had shifted, less guarded, more watchful, as though he were waiting for something to break. Hermione exhaled slowly, her fingers pausing on a slim volume bound in frostbitten leather. The script inside was no longer in Latin or Old High Parseltone, but in a language that shimmered faintly, like rime under moonlight. She had seen it before, in the dreams that came after touching the cursed oath. Stone, fragments of vows, whispered in voices long buried. "By blood unyielding, by silence kept, we bind our line to winter's debt." The words had haunted her, not as a threat, but as a plea. "It's not a curse," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "It's a punishment, one they swore upon themselves." Draco turned, his gray eyes narrowing. "My ancestors were many things, Granger, but masochists." "That seems unlikely." "No," she said, lifting her gaze to meet his. "They were afraid of what they'd done. The oath wasn't to protect power, it was to contain guilt. They believed magic should suffer if their blood refused to atone." He stiffened. "You're saying the frost, the weakening, it's not an attack, it's remorse made real?" She nodded.
Magic responds to intent, especially old magic. When generations of Malfoys buried their shame instead of facing it, the magic remembered. It froze. And now, as the truth surfaces, the ice spreads, because the magic doesn't know how to thaw. A log split in the hearth, sending up a shower of sparks. Draco walked slowly to the fireplace, staring into the flames as if searching for answers in their dance. My father never spoke of regret, not once. Maybe he didn't know how, she said gently. Or maybe he thought strength meant silence. But strength isn't in never breaking. It's in letting yourself. He looked at her then, really looked. At the way her hair caught the firelight, at the quiet certainty in her eyes, at the faint tremor in her hands from cold or emotion, he couldn't tell. And in that moment, something shifted inside him, a crack in the ice that wasn't just magical but human. Outside, the wind howled through the skeletal trees, and the frost on the windowpane began to spread, thicker, darker, like veins of sorrow. Hermione felt it too, the familiar drain, the hollowing in her chest where her magic used to surge. She closed her eyes, breath shallow. Then Draco knelt beside her, not with pride, not with reluctance, but with something that startled her, openness. He placed his hand over hers on the book, his touch cool but not cold. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted, voice low. But I don't want to pass it on, not to a child, not to anyone. Tears pricked Hermione's eyes, not from weakness, but from warmth, real, unbidden warmth that began to bloom in her chest. It wasn't just his words, it was the surrender in them, the courage of confession. And then faintly at first her magic stirred, not with a surge, not with force, but like the first breath after drowning. A pulse, soft and golden, spreading from her core to her fingertips. The book beneath their hands glowed, not with icy light, but with the deep, amber hue of a hearth at dusk. The frost on the window cracked with a sound like distant chimes. Hermione laughed, breathless. It's not about breaking the oath, she whispered. It's about answering it, with honesty, with compassion. Draco didn't let go of her hand. Outside the wind stilled. And for the first time in centuries, the ice on the Malfoy estate began, not to shatter, but to melt. The air in the Malfoy crypt was thick with the scent of frozen stone and old magic, each breath a sharp tug at the lungs. Hermione's fingers trembled, not from the cold, though it gnawed at her skin like hungry teeth, but from the weight of what they were about to do. Before them, etched into a slab of black ice that had grown from the earth itself, was the oath. Words in an ancient runic script pulsed with a pale, glacial light, the vowels shaped like icicles, the consonants sharp as broken glass. It had been here for centuries, buried beneath generations of silence, feeding on guilt, twisting bloodlines into brittle husks. Draco stood beside her, his face gaunt in the icy glow. His silver eyes flickered over the runes, reading what few living souls could. It's not just a curse, he said, voice low. It's a confession. My ancestor, he didn't just bind our family to secrecy, he bound us to shame. Hermione exhaled, her breath shimmering like mist. And every time a Malfoy chose pride over truth, the ice grew stronger. They had found the truth deep in the forbidden archives beneath the ministry, in a scroll wrapped in frost-resistant dragonhide. The oath had been made during the War of the Hollow Moon, when a Malfoy patriarch had struck a bargain with a frozen spirit to protect his family from a rival bloodline. But the price was not just loyalty, it was silence. Silence on betrayal, on injustice, and all that festered in the dark corners of their legacy. And now, generations later, the silence had turned to ice. But the scroll hinted at a way forward, not destruction, but transformation. We have to speak it together, Hermione said, unrolling the parchment between them. Not as enemies, not as heirs of old grudges, but as something else. Draco looked at her, then really looked. Not with the sneer of childhood, nor the guarded wariness of recent years, but with something raw and unguarded. I don't even know what I am anymore, he admitted. Not the boy I was, not the man my father wanted, and not who you think I am. Her heart thudded. Then be who you choose. They stepped forward, placing their hands on either side of the ice slab. The runes flared, sending cracks spiderwebbing through the floor. The temperature plummeted, and for a moment Hermione feared it would consume them both. But she began to speak. I, Hermione Granger, of no ancient blood, but of chosen will. Take his vow not in silence, but in voice, not in pride, but in truth. Draco hesitated, then joined her, his voice steady, despite the tremor in his hands. I, Draco Lucius Malfoy, heir of a name weighted with shadow, take this vow not to hide, but to heal, not to preserve, but to protect. Their words wove together, syllables threading like flame through frost. The ice groaned, shuddered, and began to melt, not into water, but into light. The runes softened, their jagged edges blurring, reshaping. The vow was rewriting itself. Let this bond not silence, but speak. Let it not freeze, but guard. Let it not bind through guilt, but endure through choice. A warmth spread from the slab, gentle as a sunrise after endless winter. The crypt, once a tomb of cold secrets, filled with golden light. Hermione turned to Draco, tears freezing on her cheeks before melting into warmth. "It's done," she whispered. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached for her hand, his fingers lacing with hers, not in ritual, but in trust. Above them, far beneath the Malfoy estate, the last of the frost cracked and fell away, and somewhere, deep in the veins of the earth, a long-forgotten spring began to flow once more. The warmth spread upward through the stone steps, a pulse beneath their feet, as though the earth itself were drawing its first full breath in centuries. Outside, the sky over Wiltshire split in two, one half still shrouded in the ashen twilight of the frost's dominion, the other streaked with the amber blush of returning dawn. The trees, once skeletal and silvered with rime, shivered as droplets fell from their branches like tears long withheld. A robin, timid and bright-eyed, landed on a thawing hawthorn and sang, the first bird call in weeks. Hermione and Draco emerged from the crypt slowly, blinking against the light that now spilled across the estate grounds. The air smelled of damp soil and crushed mint of life stirring beneath the surface. Frost still clung to the edges of the manor's stone facade, but it was retreating, shrinking back from the windows like a tide pulled inland. Vines, once brittle and dead, sprouted tender green shoots with visible urgency, curling toward the sun as if remembering how to live. Draco stopped at the top of the steps, his boots crunching on the last remnants of black ice. He stared at his hands, pale, familiar, but somehow different. "I can feel it," he said, quiet. "Not just the warmth, the absence. Like a weight I didn't know I was carrying, is gone." Hermione stood beside him, watching the way the morning light caught in his hair, turning the platinum strands to spun gold. She had seen him angry, arrogant, afraid, but never like this, unburdened, human. She reached out without thinking, brushing her thumb over the back of his hand. "You're not defined by what your ancestors did in the dark," she said. "You're defined by what you did today." He looked at her then, and something passed between them, wordless, fragile, but undeniable. Not gratitude, not relief, something deeper, recognition. A gust of wind swept through the garden, carrying with it the scent of blooming crocus and the distant chime of church bells from the village below. Somewhere, a child laughed. The frost had not just broken in the Malfoy crypt, it had shattered across the country. In the Highlands, a MacFusty elder wept as magic returned to her fingertips. In a cottage near Ottery St. Catchpole, Ron Weasley blinked in astonishment when his wand sparked to life after days of silence. In St. Mungo's, patients long weakened by the creeping chill sat up in bed, breathing deeply for the first time in weeks. But here, in this quiet moment, none of that mattered. Draco turned his hand, interlacing his fingers with hers again. "I should go see my mother," he said. "She's been at the edge of it all, holding the house together while the magic faded. I don't even know how much she knew about the oath, but she never spoke against it." "Not once," Hermione nodded. "And you're going too?" "I have to. Not as a dutiful son, not out of obligation, but because I need her to hear it from me, that we don't have to be silent anymore." She smiled, small and tender. "That's brave." He huffed a dry laugh. "I don't feel brave. I feel exposed. Like I've been wrapped in layers of ice for so long that warmth feels strange, unnatural. It will pass," she said softly. "You'll learn to wear your truth like a second skin, and it won't be easy, but it will be yours." They walked toward the manor together, shoulders brushing with each step. Inside, the house was waking.
House elves murmured in the kitchens, lights flickered to life in the chandeliers, and the portrait of Lucius Malfoy, once so haughty and cold, now hung silent and still, as if even his painted soul sensed the shift. In the drawing-room, Narcissa rose from the settee, her posture regal as ever, but her eyes, wide, uncertain, betrayed her. "Draco," she said, voice steady, but thin, "is it over?" He didn't hesitate. He crossed the room and pulled her into an embrace, something he hadn't done since he was a boy. "It's over," he said into her shoulder. "And it's changed. The oath is rewritten. We don't have to hide anymore." She stiffened, then slowly, carefully, her arms came up around him. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, vanishing into the lace at her collar. Hermione lingered in the doorway, watching them. She thought of her parents, safe now in Australia, unaware of the winter that had gripped magical Britain. She thought of Harry, of Ginny, of all the years spent fighting, not just dark wizards, but the weight of history, of expectation, of blood. And she realized this was the real victory, not the breaking of a curse, but the courage to begin again. Later, as the sun climbed higher, Draco found her on the terrace, wrapped in a borrowed cloak, sipping tea from a chipped cup, hers from the kitchen. He handed her a book bound in pale leather. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I found in the private library. A journal, my great-grandmother's. She wrote about the frost, not as a curse, but as a warning." She tried to speak against the oath, then locked her writings away. Hermione traced the embossed initials on the cover. "And you're giving it to me?" "I want it to be seen," he said. "I want the truth to live somewhere beyond these walls." She looked up at him, the wind lifting a curl from her forehead. "You're going to be all right, Draco Malfoy." He met her gaze, and for the first time, there was no mask, no defense, just honesty. "I think I might be." And as the ice melted from the rooftops, and the world remembered how to breathe, they stood together, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as two who had walked through winter, and emerged, finally, into the light. The air in the hospital wing was still, heavy with the scent of frostbitten parchment and burnt sage. Outside, the first pale light of dawn crept over the battlements of Hogwarts, casting long, thin shadows across the stone floor. Hermione lay with her eyes closed, fingers twitching against the rough wool of the blanket. Every muscle ached, as though she'd been dragged through a blizzard barefoot. Her magic, usually a steady hung beneath her skin, flickered like a dying candle. She could feel it, absent, frayed at the edges, barely there. Beside her, Draco slept, or pretended to. His breathing was too shallow, too controlled. One arm was wrapped tightly across his chest, the other twitching slightly, as if still fighting invisible chains. A thin layer of frost clung to the edge of his bedsheet, brittle and ghostly, melting slowly as the warmth of the wing fought back the lingering curse. It had taken 3 days to break the oath. 3 days of incantations carved into ice, of tracing bloodlines through crumbling grimoires, of standing in the heart of the Malfoy ancestral vault beneath the weight of centuries of pride and silence. The oath had not been written in ink, but in frozen breath, sealed with a vow spoken in a dialect even Hermione had to reconstruct from fragments. And it had demanded a price. She remembered the moment clearly, the cavern trembling, the rooms flaring blue, Draco stepping forward before she could stop him. He had spoken his true name, not as a boast, but as a surrender. "Draco Lucius Malfoy," he'd said, voice raw. "I name myself not to uphold the oath, but to release it." And then the ice had cracked, not outward, but inward, drawing the magic into him like a blade. They had both burned through reserves. They didn't know they had. Hermione's final spell had been a weave of old Gaelic binding and modern arithmancy, a desperate fusion of logic and intuition. She had felt her teeth chatter as her magic poured out, not in a stream but in a flood, until her vision blurred and her knees gave way. Now, silence, recovery. The door creaked open, and Madame Pomfrey slipped in, her slippers whispering against the floor. She checked Draco first, tutting under her breath as she peeled back the sheet to examine the faint, branching scars now etched along his forearm. Frostburn, she called it. A mark left by magic too cold to be contained. Then she turned to Hermione, pressing a cool hand to her forehead. "You're lucky to be alive," she murmured. "Both of you. That kind of magic doesn't forgive." Hermione swallowed, her throat dry. "The others? The Longbottoms, the Weasleys, the Bones, they're recovering. The frost has receded from their veins. The curse is broken." A slow breath escaped her, part relief, part exhaustion. "And the Ministry?" Pomfrey's expression darkened. "They're already calling it a Malfoy scandal." Fudge's nephew was affected, nearly lost his wand hand. The Prophet's printing a special edition. The Ice Curse and the House of Malfoy, a legacy unmasked. Hermione closed her eyes. "They'll want a trial. They already do. The Wisingamot convened last night. Draco's name is on the summons." A rustle from the other bed. Draco turned his head, his eyes open now. Gray, clouded with pain, but alert. "Let them try me," he said, voice hoarse. "I'll say the same thing I said in that vault. The oath was never mine. I didn't know it existed until you showed me." Hermione looked at him. "They won't care about ignorance. They'll want blood." "And what about you?" he asked, shifting slightly. "You're the one who proved the curse was real. You're the hero. I'm also the one who spent 3 days in a Malfoy sanctuary, working with you." She gave a weak smile. "That won't play well in the headlines." He studied her, then looked away. "You didn't have to stay. You could have walked away." "So could you," she said softly. "But you didn't." The silence between them deepened, no longer filled with exhaustion, but with something else. Something fragile, uncertain, like the first thaw after a long winter. Outside, the sun rose higher, and the last of the frost on Draco's sheet melted into nothing. Snow fell in slow, silent flakes over the Malfoy estate, but it no longer clung to the manor's stone like a shroud. The iron gates, once frozen shut by enchantments older than memory, now stood open, creaking gently in the winter breeze. Inside, the air smelled of beeswax and wood smoke, not dust and decay. A fire crackled in the grand hearth of the east drawing room, its light dancing across gilded frames and restored tapestries that no longer whispered with resentment. Hermione Granger stood in the center of the room, her breath visible in the lingering chill, but no longer sharp with magic's absence. She ran her fingers along the spine of a book pulled from the newly catalogued library. On blood and binding, its title etched in silver, the words shimmered faintly under her touch, as if waking from a long sleep. Around her, elves moved quietly, carrying vases of forced lilies and polishing silver that had once been tarnished by neglect and guilt. Draco stood by the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. He wore no robes of black or silver, but a simple charcoal coat, sleeves pushed up as though ready for work. He watched the thaw creeping across the grounds, the ice receding from the fountain, the statues of serpents blinking frost from their eyes, as if remembering how to breathe. "It's strange," he said, voice low, "to see light in places that only knew shadow." Hermione turned to him. "It's not just the manor. It's you." He gave a small, wry smile. "Don't go sentimental on me, Granger." "I'm not. I'm observing." She stepped closer, the wooden floor warm beneath her boots. "The curse fed on secrets, on silence. The moment you spoke your ancestors' names aloud, when you admitted what they'd done, the ice began to retreat." Draco exhaled, his breath fogging the glass. "I didn't think I could say those words. My father never would have." "No," she said gently. "But you're not him." A silence settled between them, softer than the snow outside. It wasn't the heavy quiet of old enmities, but something tentative, tender, like the first green shoot after a long winter. "I found something today," he said after a moment. "In the West Vault. Not a curse, not a spell, a letter. From my great-grandmother to her son. She begged him to break the oath, to let the bloodline live freely, without vengeance as its compass." Hermione's eyes widened. "And he didn't." "No, but I can." He turned from the window, meeting her gaze. "We can." She felt the weight of that word. We. Not master and investigator, not Malfoy and Mudblood, not even former enemies. Just two people who had walked through frozen memories and come out the other side, changed. Outside a bird sang, a lone lark, brave in the cold.
It hadn't been heard on the grounds in over 50 years. Draco reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver key. The family crypt is open now. No more wards. No more ice. If you're ready, we can go together. There's one last seal to break. Hermione took the key. It was warm in her palm. I'm ready, she said. They walked through the house, hand in hand, past portraits that no longer turned away, past halls where candles lit themselves in welcome. At the back terrace, stone steps led down into the earth, once blocked by rime and silence. Now the door stood ajar, a soft blue glow pulsing from within. Draco paused at the threshold. This is it, he said. The oath was buried here, bound in ice and blood. But it doesn't have to stay. Hermione squeezed his hand. Then let it go. Together they stepped into the crypt. The air was still, but no longer dead. Beneath a slab of black marble, frost cracked and fell like old tears. And deep beneath the stone, something ancient, something cold and sorrowful, began to dissolve. The ministry's main auditorium hummed with the low murmur of enchanted chandeliers and the rustle of parchment as officials adjusted their seats. Rows of dark wood benches curved like frozen waves toward the central dais, where Hermione Granger stood, her back straight, hands clasped around a bound scroll of silver-edged vellum. Frost still clung to the edges of the enchanted windows, pale creeping tendrils that no charm seemed to fully dispel. It had been 3 months since the first reports, ancient families waking to find their spells sputtering, their wands growing cold in their hands. The magic hadn't vanished. It had been withheld. She cleared her throat, and the room fell silent. What began as a series of isolated incidents, Lady Greengrass unable to cast a simple levitation charm, the Pruett's ancestral wards failing in midwinter, had spiraled into a crisis threatening the foundation of wizarding society. Bloodlines once considered unshakable were crumbling beneath an invisible frost, and after weeks in the Malfoy family archives, buried beneath layers of forgotten oaths and high-sealed grimoires, she had found the source. It wasn't a curse, she said, voice steady. Not in the way we thought. It was a vow. A binding made in grief and rage, centuries ago, by Arcturus Malfoy after the death of his sister in a duel with a Rowena descendant. He swore that no heir of his blood would ever again place loyalty to the greater good above family, no matter the cost, and he sealed it with a magic older than the ministry itself, using the ice of the Forbidden North to bind the oath to the bloodline. A ripple passed through the crowd. Beside the Wizengamot's central bench, Draco Malfoy sat in shadowed stillness. His usual composure was frayed at the edges, dark circles beneath his eyes, a faint silver shimmer at his fingertips, where the frost oath still lingered, even after partial reversal. The magic interpreted his words literally, Hermione continued. When descendants chose paths of service, joining the Aurors, aiding Muggleborns, fighting for reform, the vow responded. It froze their magic, not as punishment, as preservation. The twisted form of protection, ensuring no Malfoy would ever suffer the perceived betrayal, Arcturus felt. She paused, glancing toward Draco. He didn't look up, but his jaw tightened. What we've done, she said, wasn't break the oath. We rewrote it, with consent, with memory. We acknowledged the pain that birthed it, and then we chose differently. The scroll in her hands shimmered. As she unfurled it, the chamber gasped. The original oath, once written in jagged runes of ice, that burned to the touch, now flowed in warm golden script. The new words were simple. I honor my family, not by silence, but by truth, not by isolation, but by connection. My blood does not bind me to the past. It frees me to shape the future. It hovered above the dais, glowing like dawn breaking over snow. Minister Pennyworth rose, her face grave. And the implications? This changes how we teach magical ethics, Hermione said. Oaths, especially blood-bound ones, must be examined not just for legality, but for emotional legacy. Magic remembers, it feels, and when we bind ourselves in pain, it answers in kind. A long silence followed. Then slowly, Pennyworth stepped forward and placed her hand on the glowing script. The light spread, snaking through the chamber's stones, melting the frost on the windows, warming the air. Draco stood at last. He walked to the dais, his boots echoing on the marble. Without a word he placed his hand beside Hermione's on the scroll. The magic flared, brighter this time, gold and silver intertwining, like two rivers meeting after a long winter. No one spoke, but something shifted. Later, in the quiet of the Ministry archives, Hermione watched snow fall beyond the glass, no longer edged with frost. Draco stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "You didn't have to defend my family," he said quietly. "I didn't," she replied. "I defended the idea that people can change, that magic can heal, that some promises are meant to be outgrown." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time in years the cold in his veins didn't ache. Snow fell in slow, soft spirals over the grounds of Malfoy Manor, dusting the once imposing hedges with a quiet mercy. The iron gates, once sealed against outsiders, now stood open. A discreet plaque had been mounted to the left post, silver lettering on dark oak. The Ethelweird Foundation for Magical Restoration and Reconciliation. Draco Malfoy stood before it, hands clasped behind his back, breath curling in pale wisps in the frigid air. He had not expected to feel this strange tightness in his chest, like grief and hope tangled together. Behind him, the manor's west wing hummed with quiet activity. Healers from St. Mungo's, scholars from the Department of Mysteries, even a few tentative volunteers from families, once scorned by his own, now moved through corridors lined with restored tapestries and unwarded doors. The library, once locked behind blood oaths and silencing charms, had become a sanctuary of shared knowledge. Ancient grimoires lay open beside modern treatises, their pages turning gently in the enchanted breeze. He had not done this for redemption. Not exactly. He had done it because when the frost had taken his mother's magic, leaving her hands cold and trembling, her wand silent, he had finally understood what it meant to lose everything. And when Hermione Granger had stood in his drawing room, her eyes sharp with purpose, and said, "We can stop this, but not alone," he had believed her. Now, weeks later, they worked side by side, not as enemies or even reluctant allies, but as something neither had expected, partners in restoration. She spent her mornings in the archives, tracing the origins of the oath spell, her quill scratching across parchment, muttering incantations under her breath. He coordinated resources, wrote letters to skeptical ministry officials, and convinced old allies, few as they were, that this was not charity, but necessity. Today, however, was different. Today, the first successful reversal had taken place. An elderly witch from the Diggory line, Agatha, whose grandson Cedric's name still brought a shadow to Draco's gaze, had arrived 3 days prior, her magic all but frozen. By dawn this morning, after a ritual combining Hermione's research and a counter-oath drawn from the original Malfoy vow, her wand had sparked to life. Draco had watched from the doorway as she conjured a bouquet of warm golden daffodils, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "You didn't have to do this," she'd whispered, looking at him. "No," he admitted. "But I wanted to." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and distant hearth smoke. Footsteps crunched in the snow behind him. He didn't need to turn to know it was her. "They're calling it the thaw," Hermione said, coming to stand beside him. "Not just here. In Hogsmeade, in Godric's Hollow, families are waking up their wands again." "It's spreading," he nodded, eyes on the horizon, where the first light of morning bled through the clouds. "It's not just the spell breaking, it's something else. Like the magic remembers how to breathe." She studied him, the way the early light caught the silver in his hair, the quiet steadiness in his posture. "You've changed. We've all changed," he replied, glancing at her. "You included." A pause. Then softly, "You used your family's name to help people, not to control them. That takes courage." He exhaled, long and slow. "I used to think legacy was about blood, about purity. Now I think it's about what you choose to carry forward, and what you choose to leave behind." She reached into her cloak and handed him a folded parchment, ministry seal intact. "They've approved the Foundation's funding, and they're lifting the sanctions on the estate." He took it but didn't open it. Instead, he looked at her. "Will you stay?" "At least until we're sure the pattern holds," she smiled, small but real. "I never said I was leaving." and for the first time in years the air around Malfoy Manor didn't feel like ice. It felt like possibility. The first light of morning touched the edge of the forbidden forest like a whisper, gilding the last remnants of frost that clung to the bark of ancient trees. Snow had receded in patches, revealing damp earth and the first shy shoots of green pushing through the thawing soil. The air still carried the crispness of winter, but it no longer bit. It breathed slow and gentle, as if the world itself were exhaling after a long, frozen dream. Hermione stood at the edge of the lake, her boots sinking slightly into the softened ground. She watched the surface of the water, no longer a sheet of ice, but a shifting mirror of sky and cloud. It was quiet, too quiet for Hogwarts, yet not unwelcome. The students were still asleep, the castle still wrapped in the hush that comes just before waking. She had not been able to rest. Even now, with the curse broken and the Malfoy oath undone, her mind turned in slow circles, tracing the path they had walked. Behind her, a twig snapped. She didn't turn. She already knew the step, the measured, careful gait of someone who had spent years learning when to be seen and when to disappear. "You're up early," Draco said, stopping a few paces away. His voice was softer than she remembered, worn down not by exhaustion, but by something deeper. Relief, perhaps, or grief. "So are you," she replied. A pause. Then he stepped forward, hands buried in the pockets of his long coat. He looked different now, less guarded, the weight in his shoulders lighter. The curse had not only drained the magic from old bloodlines, it had fed on guilt, on silence, on the unspoken things passed down like heirlooms. And in breaking the oath, they had unraveled more than magic. They had unraveled generations of silence. "I went to the family crypt last night," he said, "just to see. The ice is gone. The runes have faded." Hermione turned to him then. "How does it feel?" He looked out over the lake, his silver eyes catching the dawn. "Like waking up from a dream you didn't know was haunting you. Like something buried under snow finally breathing again." She nodded. She understood. The Ministry archives, the hidden chambers beneath Malfoy Manor, the frozen sanctuary beneath the northern moors. They had walked through memories not their own, spells written in breath and sorrow. And at the heart of it all, a promise made in desperation, a Malfoy who had sacrificed his magic to bind a greater evil, sealing it with a vow of perpetual penance. The family had paid the price for centuries, their power waning, their hearts growing colder, until the cycle was broken by two people who should never have trusted each other. "You didn't have to come back," she said quietly, after it was over. He turned to her, the faintest ghost of a smile at his lips. "Neither did you, but they both had." He had returned to tend the land, to restore what could be saved. She had stayed to write the report, to ensure the Ministry would not repeat its mistakes. But they both knew those were excuses. The real reason stood unspoken between them, as delicate as the first thaw. A single snowdrop pushed through the soil at her feet, white and trembling. Hermione crouched, brushing her fingers over its fragile petals. Magic hummed in the air, not the sharp, aching cold of the curse, but something warmer. "Alive. It's returning," she said. Draco knelt beside her, careful not to crush the emerging green. Magic, trust, maybe even hope. She looked at him then, really looked. Saw the lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his hair caught the light, the quiet strength in his hands, and she realized that healing was not a single moment. It was this, the slow return of color, the patience of roots, the courage to stand together in the quiet after the storm. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of earth and distant rain. Winter had ended, and something new was beginning. The first light of dawn gilded the edges of the forbidden forest, painting the frost-laced trees in hues of amber and rose. Hermione stood at the edge of the black lake, her breath curling in soft plumes before her. The ice had receded weeks ago, but the chill still lingered in the air, a ghost of what had nearly consumed them. She hadn't expected to find him here, not now, not after everything, but there he was, Draco Malfoy, hands tucked into the pockets of his long coat, standing just a few feet away, as if he'd been waiting all morning. "You're early," he said, his voice quieter than she remembered. "So are you," she replied, turning to face him fully. The wind tugged at her scarf, and she caught it before it could fly into the lake. He offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Old habits. I've always been up before sunrise." She studied him. There were shadows beneath his eyes, but they were softer now, less burdened. The sharpness that once defined his features had softened, not from age but from something deeper. Relief, perhaps, or peace. "It's strange, isn't it?" she said, her gaze drifting over the water. "Everything's quiet." "Not quiet," he corrected. "Just different." "Yes, different." She exhaled slowly. "I keep expecting something else to happen. Another sign, another warning. There won't be. Not here, not here." "Now how can you be so sure?" "Because the oath is broken, Hermione. Truly broken, not buried, not hidden, undone." He looked at her then, really looked. "And it wasn't my blood that broke it. It was yours. Your choice. Your voice." She shook her head. "It was both of us. You spoke the counter-vow. You stood in that circle when no one else would." "I stood because you made it possible to stand," he said, voice low. "My family spent centuries binding magic with pride, with silence. You taught me that promises aren't meant to chain. They're meant to be lived." The words settled between them like snowfall, gentle, inevitable. "I used to think I had to prove something," he continued, "to my name, to my ancestors. Now I think I just want to live without owing the past." "That's not so much to ask," she said softly. "No, but it feels like everything." They stood in silence for a long moment, the lake rippling faintly, disturbed only by a passing breeze. A kingfisher darted across the water, a flash of blue against the stillness. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I don't know. Maybe travel. See places that don't have ghosts in the floorboards. Maybe write. There are things, stories, memories, that I should have written down years ago, before they froze over. And your mother. She's at the coast. Says she wants to hear the waves every morning. No more stone walls, no more portraits watching. Just sea air and silence. And you'll go to her? Eventually. But first, I think I'd like to see the south of France. Olive trees. No snow." She smiled. "No ice." "Exactly." She wrapped her scarf more tightly around her neck. "I've been offered a position at the ministry, reforming the Department of Mysteries, restructuring how we handle ancient magic, making sure no one else inherits a curse they never asked for. You'll be brilliant at it." "I hope so. But it's not just about policy. It's about memory, about making sure we don't repeat the same mistakes under new names. Then you are the only one who should do it." They looked at each other then, not as enemies, not as reluctant allies, but as two people who had walked through fire and ice, and come out changed. "Do you think we'll ever forget?" she asked. "No," he said, "and I don't want to. Not all of it. Some things are worth remembering." "Like what?" "Like the way you wouldn't let me walk away, even when I wanted to. Like the way you came back, even when I didn't ask." The wind stilled. The sun rose higher, spilling gold over the lake. And for the first time in a long time, the world felt warm. The first light of dawn crept across the valley like a whispered secret, pale gold spilling over the frost-rimmed peaks of the highlands. Hermione stood at the edge of the glen, her breath curling in soft clouds before her. The air no longer bit with unnatural cold. It was simply morning, real, ordinary, fragile morning. Behind her, the last remnants of the enchanted ice cracked inside, collapsing into rivulets that soaked into the thawing earth. She knelt, pressing her palm to the soil. It was damp, it was warm, it was alive. A rustle of fabric made her turn. Draco emerged from the tree line, his silver-blonde hair dusted with melting frost, his cloak hanging heavy with the night's burden. He stopped a few paces away, watching the ground where the runes had burned beneath the ice. Now nothing but dark scars in the moss. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. We did it, she thought, though the victory felt quieter than she'd imagined. There had been no thunderclap, no flash of magic to seal the moment. Just this sunlight, soil, silence. "It's over," she said softly. Draco exhaled, the sound almost reverent. "Not over," he corrected, his voice low. "Changed." She looked at him then, really looked. The lines around his eyes had eased. The weight in his shoulders had shifted, not vanished, but transformed, like stone worn smooth by time and water. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out the parchment, the original Malfoy oath, brittle with age, ink frozen in jagged strokes.
It had survived centuries of cold magic, generations of silence. Now in the morning light, the letters shimmered and softened, the frozen script bleeding gently into something new. Hermione stepped closer. "It's rewriting itself." "Not rewriting," Draco murmured, releasing. He held it out to her. "You were right. It wasn't the words that bound us. It was the refusal to speak them aloud, to face them. The oath demanded silence. We gave it truth instead." She took the parchment, feeling the warmth of it now, the pulse of something ancient finally breathing. The ice had not been a curse. It had been a prison of pride, of fear, of unspoken shame. And the key had never been destruction. It had been recognition. They walked back through the glen, side by side, their footsteps pressing into the softening earth. The forest around them stirred, birds calling tentative songs, a fox darting between the bracken, the distant trickle of a stream freed from its icy cage. Magic, too, was returning, not the violent surge of a broken curse, but the slow, steady return of balance, like a heartbeat resuming after long stillness. At the edge of the woods, where the path split toward Hogsmeade and the long road to Malfoy Manor, Draco paused. "You don't have to go back alone," Hermione said. He looked at her, the flicker of something uncertain in his gaze. "You'd come? If you'll have me." A slow smile touched his lips, small, real, unguarded. "I'd like that." They stood there for a moment, the sun rising higher, gilding the trees, warming the stones beneath their feet. The world was no longer frozen. It was waking. And somewhere, deep beneath the soil, a seed cracked open.